So let me spotlight her.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, January 12th. It is 6:31. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. I'm Roger Arnold. I'm here in Tracy Hall. I'm joined remotely by Mary Layton, Claudette Brochu, Robert Gear, and Marcia Calloway. I'm also here with Interim Town Manager Rod Francis, and there's a public access terminal available downstairs. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. The only thing I would like to bring to everyone's attention is there was an addendum that was issued this afternoon that included December financial reports. They're available. We may wish to discuss them at the next meeting, but they are available in addendum should board members wish to make a motion to amend to discuss them. So I'll just say that. So can I get a motion for the approval of the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Is there a second? Okay, made by Rob, seconded Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Okay, computer is asking for security questions, so I can't open my agenda, so give me a second. But the next item on the agenda, of course, is public comment for items not on the agenda. Are there any folks who would like to make a public comment for an item not on the agenda? Stuart Richards, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I think I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'd like to make a public service announcement, and that relates to the availability of monoclonal treatment at APD for anybody who is in the early stages of a COVID infection. And I hope people will take advantage of that because the benefits are pretty good. So what I'd like to talk about are the two surveys that were done, one in 2005, one in 2018. The question that was asked on both of those surveys, question 4, was, what would you like the population of Norwich to be in the future? And in 2005, 54% of the people said they'd like it to be stable or decreasing. In 2018, that was the survey that was inaugurated by John Pepper's Selectboard. The same question, question 6, was, what would you like the population to be going forward? And the answer was 55% said they would like the population to be stable and or decreasing. Now we have quite a few people, I think, who would like to see the population grow under the guise of sustainability. So there is nothing that's unsustainable about Norwich's population at this point. And I don't see the need at all, even though it's already been approved, for spending the money that's been allocated for a sewer study, a density study, and of course you're studying the police, and you're perhaps going to approve a Beaver Meadow sidewalk for $1 million. And this all will result in an increase in taxes of, I don't know, 5% is the number that I've heard. I don't know if that's accurate or what it will amount to. But when you talk about what people would like to see in terms of the population of Norwich, there is no reason to increase the population of Norwich other than to promote growth. You can promote, and I've attempted to do it, you can promote affordable housing without increasing the population or increasing it very much. So I think that you're spending money unwisely and you're going in the wrong direction. And I would like you to reconsider. So thanks for hearing me out. And that was 2 minutes and 33 seconds. So
thank you.
Have a great night.
I was keeping track. Thank you, Stuart, for your public comment. I think Dennis Kaufman, you were next. We're taking public comments for items not on the agenda. Okay.
I want to discuss a little history, if you don't mind.
For items not on the agenda, of course.
You might when I'm done. For years, the Select Board has disavowed any ability or knowledge of how to change the education tax rate. It's time that somebody woke up. They are intimately involved. And although some of this is on the agenda for tonight, let me explain. For the past 3 years, the taxes in Norwich have gone up approximately 4%, the education taxes. And that's because the CLA has dropped 4% for each of those 3 years. This year, the CLA dropped over almost 6%, and it is now below 85%. When that happens, the state of Vermont is going to require a townwide reappraisal of the town of Norwich. There are rumors afloat that the select board is interested perhaps in not funding a reappraisal at this time. It is vital, absolutely vital, that you do so, and should have been done years ago. And I hope, and if you don't understand the math, it's pretty simple. The state of Vermont sets the education tax rate for the entire state. Then it is personalized to each town by dividing that number that they come up with by the CLA. So every time the CLA drops, the education tax rates go up. By funding or not funding a townwide reappraisal, the select board, which sets the budget, the select board then has a great deal to do with what each property owner in town pays. And non-property owners like renters then see an increase when the property's taxes go up. Therefore, I'm pleading with you to at least consider the damage that has already been done and just move ahead with getting the reappraisal done. Now, I wrote most of this request for proposal, and a request for proposal should be just that. This one is not. This one is long and cumbersome, and to get, to get bidders, you need them to tell you what they will do and then compare it to what the requirements of the state are. And if they fit and they can do it promptly, I know you want me to stop.
It's been 3 minutes, but if you can just quickly wrap up.
Well, just get a townwide reappraisal going. It's vitally important to the taxpayers of this town. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your public comment, Dennis. I believe the next person is Peter Orner. This is for items that are not on the agenda.
That's right. Thank you, Roger. Peter Orner, 6 Moore Lane. Stuart Richards is entitled to say whatever he wants. This is democracy, but he's not entitled to his own facts, not entitled to fear-mongering about transgender people in other forums, and not entitled to mischaracterize what's happening later in the meeting, which is not you all voting on $1 million sidewalk. It's voting on a petition that we have 200 people signed on to petition to apply for a grant. So you're not entitled to your own facts, and I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. Just in the future, folks can address their comments to the chair as Robert's rules allows. But thank you so much. Liz Blum, I believe you're next for items not on the agenda.
I don't know if this item is on the agenda under warrants, but thank you, Dennis, for making the point about the CLA. You saved me the trouble of doing that, and I was a lister for 6 years. And during those 6 years, we had 2 reassessments by a highly skilled professional assessor who does a lot of towns in Vermont, and he chose to leave in 2016. And I understand that the lister's request for quotations has failed to produce a single qualified candidate to do this townwide reappraisal. So the receipt of only one response from a poorly qualified candidate underscores the inability to devise a bid document that will attract qualified candidates. And I don't think we can do a townwide reappraisal until we can attract a qualified candidate, which I think is really important, and one who can use the software that we already licensed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz, for the preview of a later agenda item indeed, but thank you for your public comment. I believe Linda Cook was next. Go ahead, Linda, *6 to unmute yourself.
Well, I'm not sure if you want it now or if you want me to wait until we do the response to the reappraisal, because it's regarding the reappraisal.
I would appreciate that if you wouldn't mind.
No, not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you for sticking with us until the very end of our agenda. Thank you. Stuart Richards, go ahead, but please keep it briefer because you've spoken, if you may, and then please direct your comment to me as chair, okay?
Yeah, I had 30 seconds left.
Sure.
On what I said before, and I'm still living at 82 Elm Street. So Peter Horner is characterizing what I said as fear-mongering, and I object seriously to that. There's no reason to start name-calling, regardless of whether he agrees or disagrees with what I've said. So, and I would like it very much for the chair to keep this civil and on point. And I don't think that having somebody say that another person is fear-mongering is on point, and I don't think it's very civil. So that's what I have to say. So I appreciate your help in keeping this on a plane that I think it ought to be kept on.
Sure, of course. Folks should speak to the content of the issues and direct their comments to the chair and keep their comments under 3 minutes. That sounds a good reminder. So thank you, everyone. Are there any more public comments for items not on the agenda? Because we have a packed one. Okay, not seeing any. Let us move on to the consent agenda. So there's correspondence and AP warrants in the consent agenda, and it looks like there was one of this correspondence. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Go ahead, Claudette. Thank you. You're working towards that mute button. Okay, how about computer issues? Okay, I thought you were going to write the motion. Go ahead. So Mary, would you like to make the motion for us?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? Go ahead, Claudette.
Sorry, just a real quick question on the AP warrants. I saw there was a towing fee. Did a truck end up in a ditch or was it a breakdown?
I'm going to add Fielding. Fielding, can you answer Claudette's question? Do you happen to know?
I believe a truck did go off the road and had to get tugged out. So on a Saturday, I believe late December. I don't know. I have the details right in front of me further than that.
It's okay. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thanks so much. The next item on the agenda is the interim town manager report. This will be a verbal report from Rod. Rod, what can you tell us? Let me find you so I can spotlight.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming along. So I'm happy to entertain any questions related to the line in my written report. So the big announcement, I guess, is that Former acting police chief Simon Keeling has accepted the position of permanent police chief, and we are now in a contract with him to. Well, actually, no, he's accepted the position, and his start date was last Monday. So we look forward to strong working relationship with him on the issues currently before the police department and the select board. We continue to work through a series of issues with Public Works. The new Public Works Director, Chris Kaufman's first day will be January the 18th. We continue to review the Public Works Department's operations and activities, particularly focusing on what's going to happen this summer. We've been helped enormously by Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission working on the Route 132 culvert replacement project. That's well underway. The bid documents are circulating. I would expect responses to that within the next couple of weeks. And we should be in a good situation to commence that in the spring. So also our projects for Tiger Town Road. We are losing our finance assistant in the finance office. We will be advertising locally and on Indeed.com and looking for Robert Half to fill the position temporarily, if possible. We've heard from Robert Half that they don't have anybody suitable in the area right now. So we are going to end up struggling quite a bit in the short term, performing all the functions in the finance office. We're relieved, I guess, that for the most part the budget is set, but we're concerned about the impact on our workload from that standpoint. We've not heard back anything definitive from the auditors. We know as recently as Monday this week that we've had some follow-up questions to do with pieces of information that they still need to review. We've not had an update on when we would expect to receive the report. But we continue to work closely with them and urge them to finish the report as fast as they can. In about at the end of next week, we will be switching from the 2011 model server that we have upstairs in the planning department to a new server, and that will be part of our IT upgrade, which will then connect also to a cloud-based backup system. And once that's in place and operational, we'll then be moving through the various buildings, replacing older computers with new computers and doing upgrades in that regard. I think that's about it, unless somebody else has particular questions about something.
I have one question, Rod. My understanding, and it's a recent understanding, so I might not be correct, is that we're required to have the auditor's report available for inspection. I believe there's a February date under statute. So I believe that would you say that we will have it by that required date?
She's certainly aware of that deadline, and we talked over before Christmas. We talked over with the possible strategies for that, including having an opinion letter that could go out in the town report, and then making the full audit report available online, on paper, available from this office, and if people were to request it, potentially mailing it to them as a response to the question of it being available to them. I should add that, she's definitely aware of the February deadline under statute.
Okay. Do any other board members have any questions or comments? Obviously, go ahead, Marcia.
So does that mean that by the statutory deadline, we're going to have a letter or a document?
We need a document.
Yeah.
So and we'll have it. That's my expectation. That is certainly my understanding and my expectation. So the possibility of including an opinion letter in the town report, which has an earlier deadline and that's specific to Norwich and our production schedule, was one of the things that she offered that apparently she provides to other towns as well. So that's a possibility that's open to us.
Right. So I just
but not a replacement for the full report.
Right. So it is not sort of our typical practice, the delivery of this, but it is still legal and compliant with the law.
Correct.
Okay. Or what we're expecting to receive. Okay. Any other questions? Obviously, it's wonderful that there's a police chief that has been promoted. Okay. Cheryl Lindbergh, you have a public comment?
Hi, yes, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. Just Rod on the server.
Mm-hmm.
Switch over or to Roger. What is the anticipated interruption by any of the departments? Just curious about that. Do we need to be sensitive to this? Is my question.
Sure. How's that going in general, Rod, in terms of disruptions, or if any?
We've had some minor disruptions. I wouldn't say there've been any. Wouldn't say it's been there's been any major disruptions. I think that we've had probably more problems with unrelated pieces of equipment, such as the phone system and so forth, than we have with the actual transition from our old IT provider to this IT provider. I think that the calculations that they've provided me with, Cheryl, are in the range of a half an hour to 1 hour, maybe more than once during the day, but basically plenty of warning and the ability to let people know. And so, I think that the possibility is that unless you're sort of involved in something where you're actually backing up to the server, you can continue to do your work on your individual terminal or laptop, and you won't necessarily experience any kind of interruption.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Just a question on the Robert Half. Are there any other companies that we could look to help us with a contract finance assistant?
I'm gonna throw that one to Fielding. There are some other temp agencies in the Valley, but I don't know if they have any specialization in their accounting field. Robert Half by far is the biggest in this field nationally or even internationally at this point. So I'm not sure if Fielding's got any clues on that one, but there may well be.
Go ahead, Fielding, if you could.
There are, Rod kind of touched on it. There are some temp agencies, but they they're not really suited for accounting type work. It's more, they tend to skew towards the manual labor side of things. So it's as of right now, Robert Half does not have a replacement available. We are going to try and hit the ground running for a permanent hire, and hopefully that will come soon. Right now, we have an anticipated deadline for applications on February 11th, so we can really focus on that immediately after tax season.
Okay. Thank you. If there's no other board comments, I'll turn it to Linda Cook for a public comment. Okay, Linda Cook, go ahead, star 6.
Thank you. I would like to just say, welcome, Chief Keeling. Congratulations on your appointment as our new chief. Thank you very much. And thank you to the board for moving that along.
Yes. Thank you, Linda, for your public comment. Okay, so now I'm going to mute the sound. Okay, so not having anything else and not seeing any questions, I'll move on to the next item on the agenda, if that's okay. And that is the draft warrant. So I want to talk about a little bit about how I would like to do this. And I'm begging for everyone's forbearance and patience as we navigate a complicated conversation during a global pandemic on Zoom. So I would like to begin with voter petitioned articles for the warrant, or what I should say, potential, because we haven't, I haven't officially heard or haven't been in touch with Bonnie Monday, our town clerk, who certifies these petitions. And the due date for that is 5 p.m. tomorrow, right? But I've tried to be as engaged as possible with some petitioners on some projects. And so I would like to talk about work that I know is being done in the community. The first one is one that directs the staff and town board to apply to the 80/20 B-Trans Match Grant for the Beaver Meadow sidewalk project. Okay. And so what I would like, and then we have one other voter petition article that I would like to address. And then I would like to actually discuss the draft warrant, the drafted text of the warrant for other items, largely the work that we've been doing with the undesignated, what was formerly known as the undesignated fund balance. Okay. So I'm going to begin. What I'm going to begin to do is I'm going to ask the petitioners for the Beaver Meadow sidewalk project to speak to us for 3 minutes to introduce it. Then I want to touch base on some concerns that I have. I want to ask some questions. I want to turn it over to Rod Francis, who's our planning director and interim town manager, to address some other concerns. Then I want to have a discussion, okay? And then I'll take public comment after that discussion, okay? So why don't we turn first to the petitioners, Andy and Peter. I'm going to just do that. Oh, go ahead, Claudette. I'm sorry, I should have asked if anyone has any questions on how I would like to proceed.
No questions on how you would like to proceed, but I have a question from about absolutely when we need to have this warrant finalized. I believe it's either the 20th or the 30th of January.
I think the earliest is the 20th and the absolute deadline is the 30th. These are dates provided by VLCT. Yeah. Let's ask Rod about our Norwich deadline for this warrant finalization. So thank you, Claudette. Rod?
I believe that Miranda might be the best person to talk about the printing needs. I believe that we're looking to resolve it in certainly no later than the 20th. But maybe we need to check in with Miranda about the printing contract and when we expect to get it to Noman.
Miranda, can you let us know what you're thinking as the sort of the project manager on this?
I'm sorry, but I don't have my timeline in front of me.
Okay.
So I don't remember. Yeah, no, sorry, but it's sometime late January.
Right. Okay.
So we should.
So that would be our expectation would be that the 30th is too late. The 20th is probably okay. And that's the time frame provided by VLCT.
Yeah. Right. So go ahead, Claudette. So go ahead.
So we do not need to finalize this tonight is my big point.
So this is a draft warrant. That's correct. And so we are discussing a draft warrant. I think as part of a draft warrant process, we figure out what should be added or as a part of that draft, and we should expect to see. We will have to see a final warrant to approve. We have a special meeting that we've discussed over agenda setting for the 14th. I think we might be a little ambitious to do that for the 14th. So we could seek to have one next week, and as much as it pains me to say. But we would only have this as the agenda item, and it would be for anything else that came in that was certified by the clerk, and any sort of like edits that we choose to make, technical edits is what I would say. How's that?
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to, as I said, this petition, there's, from what I hear, there's more than enough signatures. I would like to speak to what that means, but first I want to talk to the folks who sort of looking to petition us. So, and let me find Zoom. Peter, you need to turn on your screen for me to spotlight you.
Roger, just a point of correction. There's a whole group of us that are petitioning. I think Andy's going to speak for us, but there's a whole group of us. It's not just
okay. That's great. Oh, sorry. I just accidentally muted you. I'm so sorry. I did that before last time too.
It's okay. But I'm deferring to Andy.
I'm looking for someone to present on behalf of a group, and it sounds like Andy. So Andy, my question for you in sort of 3 minutes is, tell us a little bit about the, read it if you can, if you don't mind, if you have it. So we have the benefit of that because it's not in the packet. Read it for us, and then tell us a little bit about it, and then about the motivation for it, and then anything else you would like to say in like 3.5 minutes. So okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving us time to do this. Oh, Andy Shearer, 23 Hazen Street. Thank you for giving us time to present this. So the petition that we submitted to Bonnie on Monday with, I think it was, 215 plus signatures that people signed on to was, shall the voters of the town of Norwich petition the town manager and the select board to apply for 2022 V-Trans bicycle and pedestrian grant, where the grant pays 80% of the total cost and the town is responsible for 20%, for the purpose of increasing pedestrian safety by completing the sidewalk loop, connecting the current Beaver Meadow sidewalk to Moore Lane.
Okay, thank you.
I guess one of the reasons we wanted to basically include the 20% responsibility for the town is that I think one of the average voters' concern about this project is its cost. We heard Stuart Richard, saying it's $1 million project. Yes, that is true, but that is not the town's responsibility. And in the end, so this is a grant where the town would be responsible for paying that amount over the course of 5 years, but we would be reimbursed 80% of the total costs. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear to the average voter, that is, a much different price tag than the $1 million that people tout, who are generally opposed to it. So wanted to get that out there. We felt it was important to put this forward, thinking that there are traffic calming issues that, and things that we've talked about with Rod and some other folks in the town, but we don't think that these are mutually exclusive. I think we think the pedestrian buffer with a sidewalk, a physical structure, is ultimately the safest for people. So granted, we are not opposed to other traffic calming measures, but still feel that this is a necessary part of the infrastructure for the neighborhood on Beaver Meadow Road, given the high volume of traffic that it sees. I know there's another concern that people have in terms of the timeline, and so I just wanted to address that. The project generally V-Trans opens the applications and announces the projects in April. Applications are due in June. Awards are generally announced in August. And so it isn't until later that fall that we could even begin working. But in that time, we would need to assemble a project team, which would be the municipal manager, which would be Rita at Two Rivers. The project manager would be someone from V-Trans, possibly DPW director, town manager, the design engineer, select board members. So there's going to be time to assemble the team. Now, if we think about our timeline, we are looking now into the fall, and that's when we begin our budget planning. We just all finished, right? September, October, November. So I spoke with Rita about this, and she said that, these things can go as fast or as slow as we want them to go. So given the concerns that a lot of people have for the budget, we could, if this were approved now, the timeline would be okay for us to, put it into the budget for the following year and put it on put it on the warrant. So the only other issue is we did not mention any financial dollar amount that we're asking for in this time, because per Rod's request, it's generally perceived that you don't ask for something and ask for the money at the same time. And, Rod, if you address that at some point, but I wanted to just make that known, that we haven't put out additional requests for the specific dollar amount, because we wanted to, get the town approval for this, and just felt that getting the 20% responsibility was, again, part of the language for this. And ultimately safety is a big concern, so that's kind of identifies kind of where we're coming from when creating the language.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for that, Andy.
Sure.
And thanks to your efforts in engaging the community on this issue. I believe 165 is the threshold that is needed, right? And so this had considerably more support from that. So one of the things that I did when I wanted to reach out to folks who I knew who were active on this issue, because from earlier conversations, we in some ways knew to perhaps expect a warrant article. A previous town manager had even suggested that would be an acceptable process, right? So I started, people made me aware of their plans, which I really appreciated. So because I'm really concerned about what board obligations are, right? And which is a pesky word that I will probably reference again in this conversation. I did ask Rod if we could reach out to our town attorney on this warrant language, right? And so the advice of our town council is that generally this article language as crafted is outside of the scope of the voters to decide on, largely because the costs are unclear and the potential burden on the voters themselves, right, in terms of costs and future obligations are unclear, right? And so we can't necessarily build a budget and build future planning around a warrant article that makes reference to matches, but not these numbers. So again, the advice generally was that this article language as drafted was outside of the scope and power of voters to have as a ballot measure. And so the board could potentially look to reject it. That being said, without even sort of polling you as a group, right? I feel strongly, or that I believe that we all would like to not reject it in its face, right? There's been considerable public interest in some of the issues that are brought forward as a result of this feasibility study, but there were also some potential concerns that were brought forward with the feasibility study. So I would like us to, I think for a little bit of discussion, I would like us to get towards some kind of alternative that meets the community's concerns where they are, but due to legal advice, our hands are tied that we should not be moving forward with this article as drafted. So that was my spiel in terms of what I tried to do for diligence of this evening. And I would like to turn to Rod a little bit, because I, of course, shared the attorney's work with Rod in this process. So I would like Rod to potentially address both some of these points, but maybe not so much, and just talk a little bit about what he saw in the feasibility study and where we are to date on this project. Because right now, this is a planning project with a completed feasibility study. What does it mean to have both great community interest, great number of signatures, but also a great number of obligations and concerns for us as elected officials? So I would like, if it's all right, to hear a little bit from Rod, and then we should have a discussion. Okay. So go ahead, Rod. Can you, I hope I set you up to offer some insights.
Sure. Thank you, Roger. And thank you, Andy, and everyone for bringing the topic forward. I think it's a really important one. I want to start off by also saying that I also have spoken at length with Rita Cito from Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission and other people from VTrans and so forth on the feasibility study as it stands now and the path forward. I want to try and be as succinct as possible and hopefully offer a path forward that is going to satisfy the hopes of the neighborhood group that's been moving this project forward, but show a path that I think that starts from a position where we are currently in terms of what we know and what we don't know. So the first remark to make, just in very general terms, which gets back to the cost question, and I just want to sort of place it out there and let it percolate for a little while, is although the study was submitted in 2021 and much of the work for the study was undertaken during COVID conditions, the estimates for the cost of the work are actually based on assessments and judgments that predate COVID in terms of the inflationary impact. And so the $1.5 million estimate, which is a very rough order of magnitude estimate for the total cost of the sidewalk project, now looks wildly out of date. And I think it's reasonable to assume at this point that it's twice as expensive as that at least. And then by the time it's done, if it was to proceed in the 23-24 timeframe, it might be actually closer to 3 times as much. This is, as Andy pointed out, not the full burden for the town. If the town was to participate in this program from VTrans, it would still be a 80-20 split. We would have 20% responsibility and VTrans would have 80. But if you double it, then the town's burden goes from $300,000 to $600,000. So I think that the question of the cost of it, in and of itself, given the really dramatic increase in the cost of materials and labor for constructing the sidewalk on the basis of recent price hikes, is something that should give the group pause. And that's a regrettable external factor that no one could have predicted. So the next point that I want to make is that when I read the feasibility study, I saw things in it that were maybe a little bit different from other people on the basis of my experience as a planner working on similar issues and similar scale projects in other communities. And it's partly to do with my job as being the kind of person that looks at obstacles to getting projects realized and trying to figure out whether those obstacles are readily overcome or not. And so the next part of this discussion is going to be a little bit technical. I understand that for safety reasons, the community prefers the option where there's a grade separation between the sidewalk and the roadway, the existing roadway. Right now, everybody walks and bikes and drives at the same elevation on the same surface. They all share the roadway. As you know from thinking about it just a little bit, that means that there's nothing that interrupts or interferes with the wheels of a vehicle if it's veering out of control and potentially could have a conflict with another vehicle, or more importantly, a pedestrian or a cyclist. In other words, there's no physical barrier that's going to prevent the vehicle from a physical conflict with a vulnerable road user like a pedestrian or a walker. I mean, a pedestrian or a cyclist. So often the preference is to either significantly separate the pedestrians and the cyclists from the roadway by building an independent path that's some distance away, or using the more standard process, which is to establish an elevation for the sidewalk that's slightly higher, usually 5 to 6 inches higher, with a gutter on it that will also collect stormwater, and that separation is enough to hopefully remind the car driver that there's an edge to the roadway and that the area devoted to bike and pedestrian use is separate, and that provides something of an interruption, if you like. So that they mount the curb there, it's enough of a jolt for them to change direction or to take emergency action and prevent them having a collision with a cyclist or a pedestrian. There's a technical downside to this at this current point, which is the emergence of automated vehicle controls. So basically remote control vehicles, which is already with us with the Teslas. Computer-aided vehicle control systems don't actually translate or aren't able to read a difference in grade. And so a vehicle controlled by the current technology, computer technology, would not actually prevent the vehicle from mounting the curb. And so there's some debate, which is growing now, about the best way to control a mix between cyclists and pedestrians and vehicle operators in the new context of vehicles being autonomously controlled by a computer. That wasn't contemplated in the study, and that's fine. It's not, it's obviously not commonplace, but it will become increasingly commonplace. The next point is that the nature of the existing stretch of road features some bridges with sidewalks on one side and then above grade obstacles, including a large piece of ledge on the other side, which necessitate changing the side of the road that the sidewalk is on. So if you go back to the feasibility study, you'll notice that the drawings show the sidewalk switching sides of Beaver Meadow to accommodate these shifts in terrain, which are quite abrupt and difficult. It's very expensive and difficult to add a sidewalk to another side of a bridge. And so they've attempted to avoid that by having the sidewalk cross over continually. What that also necessitates is crosswalks, which would also probably necessitate the possibility of each one of those being controlled by the user-activated LED lights like the one out the front of Tracy Hall right now. As we know from past experience, not all neighbors appreciate the impact of those kinds of lights. So I think it's important to actually contemplate what that would look like, how that would work, what the neighbors might feel about that. If you don't do that, if you don't use the RFTs, which I can't remember what the acronym means, but the flashing LED lights that are activated by the crosswalk user, then what you're effectively doing is hoping that the pedestrians and cyclists act as traffic calming devices for the roads using the vehicles using the road. And so every time you've got a crosswalk, you've got a conflict between vehicle road users and pedestrians and cyclists. It's not necessarily something that you want to induce a lot of. And so, again, there are other approaches that are explored in the study, and some of them might be worth a more sustained review in light of the cost consequences, in light of the design and terrain issues that I've identified, and in light of the changing technology that's going to operate vehicles in the future. And so one possibility which would be consistent with road traffic guidance from the city of Burlington and other municipalities in Vermont would include having a sharrow, which is a shared lane between cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicle operators. This could either be done seasonally, or it could be done, if it was successful and we were able to establish that we could operate it year round, we could leave it permanently in place. This would necessitate basically taking up one of the existing lanes and using it predominantly for cyclist and pedestrian use, and then having the other lane be one way in one direction or the other, or some such arrangement such as that. I feel like the study went through all these alternatives, but fairly quickly, and I wasn't involved in the study. But I think that these other approaches are actually worth spending some more time exploring. I think the next point I want to make is that it's regrettable that my predecessor, Herb, didn't understand that there was no phase 2 study that did not commit the town to a construction project. So unfortunately, what we learned the hard way was that the very next step, which is what Andy and his neighbors are suggesting here is the pre-engineering study, which commits you to construction. Like, it's really important to understand that if the voters were to vote on this article, setting aside the legal questions, if the town was to proceed with this project, we are committing to a construction project. However much that costs and however long that takes, we're committing to it. Now, the problem obviously is that conditions can change. I pointed to external conditions that have changed in terms of cost. I pointed to other issues to do with the design of the proposal and the terrain that exists. And I've pointed to technology changes that might affect the way motor vehicles operate on the roads. What we don't have is any solid data on actual conflicts between pedestrian, cyclists, and road users. We have a very small amount of data suggesting that there was a property damage only accident, just one, in the period of time where the data has been collected over a 5-year period. When it's a property damage incident, it means like a fender bender, right? So it means no physical harm to either road user, and it obviously didn't involve a pedestrian or a cyclist. So we don't have enough solid data to justify making dramatic changes on the basis of safety. We don't have a clear sense of how much this is going to cost. And we don't have a sense of whether the solution that's been proposed, which is a sidewalk, is going to achieve the kinds of things that we really want to in the long term. What this points out to me is that, unfortunately, I think there should be an interim step. There should be a separate phase 2, sort of, if you like, a feasibility study level 1 and then a feasibility study level 2, where you narrow down the options and you really explore those options in more detail before a community commits to a very large and potentially expensive construction project. I feel like that's possibly the best direction we can go in. And I have worked out a way, I think, in which we can draft an article for the warning that would direct the town staff, including the planning director and the town manager or interim town manager, to work on first identifying potential external funds for another feasibility study. I'd have to note here it would not be VTrans, or fund it internally and do further research on what the possibilities are. And I feel like that will give the broader community much more opportunity to understand what the issues are and for us to frame the project in a larger context, which would include the action item 11 from the 2020 town plan, which calls for a master plan for sidewalks, trails, and pathways. So I feel like there's a huge opportunity here to take advantage of Huntley Meadows as a destination for people on all forms of transportation, especially children, and that there's lots of work we can do here. There's also potentially other work we can do to do more for traffic calming and improving the facilities for bike and pedestrian users in other parts of the village in particular. And that this gives us an opportunity to explore those questions in more detail before committing to a project, which unfortunately at this point, A, seems to have become way more expensive than it was even just a year ago, and B, uncertain for us in terms of how much it actually would cost. The last point, if we were to pursue the grant opportunity as it's been presented here by Andy and others, then there's a ranking system that goes on at VTrans as to what the most important projects are. And they have limited funds. And I don't know if ARPA and other new federal sources of funds are going to boost their funding amounts that they can grant out to communities. But my understanding is it's in the $3 to $4 million range total, which means that a project of this scale could well dominate the entire annual fund allocation for this grant program. So then you have to consider whether this is the most urgent thing to do in the bike ped world for VTrans across the state. It's not connecting a residential community to a school. It's not enabling people from a hospital or a assisted living facility to get to a store. It's not connecting a drugstore to an old people's home. It's not doing all the kinds of things that VTrans is often looking to do with these funds, which is to resolve a really critical bike and pedestrian conflict with vehicles. Think here of how many years it took to put the sidewalk underneath the 91-89 overpass in White River Junction between the VA and the McDonald's, which is a heavily trafficked section of Route 5 by pedestrians who are in the roadway in the middle of the night going to and from the VA up until last year. So that's the kind of project that VTrans is actually looking for. I'm not sure how well this one would rank up against other projects in the state. I don't want to imply or suggest that this project is not important for the town or not important to pursue. I just wanted to be realistic about what you could reasonably expect VTrans to do with a very limited funding package with a lot of demand on those funds. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, so thanks very much, Rod, for that thoroughness. So I want to say just a couple things. Like one, I know Peter has insisted in the past that it's not this is not necessarily a project of some residents or some neighbors, but rather this is a project of a larger community interest, right? And so I noticed your facial expressions when we used a shorthand. So of course we acknowledge that it's more than that, of course. And then the only thing I will say too is that it's not necessarily the board at this time has made no judgment about the dollar amount, 1.5 to or 300 or 600,000 as the town's contribution. It's that we don't actually know any of those numbers. Someone in the chat, which I would like us to avoid if possible, asked, how are you adjusting these estimates? I think the point is it's all anecdotal and best estimates with the knowledge and experience that folks have. I contacted a contractor for a project of my own who told me that materials were 140% increasing this year, right? And that every year, generally, materials increase about 6 to 10%, and about 4 to 6% for labor if you wanted to keep your labor force. So, so I'll just say that. So I think what I would like us to, given sort of the attorney's advice and given some concerns by town staff, we need to pair that with the overwhelming community interest to identify a way to center Beaver Meadow more meaningfully in in action item number 11 in the town plan. And I think we need to finally hear people acknowledge some mistakes on process from a previous administration and identify a meaningful way forward, right? Not a performative way forward. So that's where I am with this. That's where I would like to hear from our discussion. We can ask Rod if he has some suggestions, but right now I want to stop talking, hear from board members, take public comment. Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Article 11 and you also said the town plan.
I'm sorry. I meant action number 11 from the implementation chapter of the town plan. Thank you for the clarity.
Okay.
Go ahead, Marcia.
I think that this is terribly difficult for all the reasons that Rod has very ably set out. And I think it's clear we have to have a number if we're going to ask the voters for something. The thing I'd like to sort of get clear in my mind is we've had a study, and exactly what would we be looking at a future study? How would that differ? The one that you just proposed, Rod.
So that's a great question. Can I just take some other board member comments or questions, and then we'll get back to that before we, is that okay? Okay. Any other board member comments initially, and then we'll get to Marcia's good question. Go ahead, Claudette.
Just, my memory is failing me. With these grant funds, do we have to pay out completely? Is it like FEMA? Do we have to pay out completely and then get reimbursed, or do we just need to come up with the 20% match if we perchance received the grant?
Fielding, you have your hand up. Do you want to address that?
We would need to pay upfront and then be reimbursed.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. And then that's it for now.
Okay, Rob or Mary? Go ahead,
I
Mary.
would like this.
Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead.
However, it can be arranged with remaining legal and looking for the least possible impact on the budget. I would like to find a way that we could go forward and get a real reading of the public support. So some form of a warrant article that elicits that kind of survey would, I think we need to be able to find that.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Mary?
Well, I'm just thinking about how this issue has come up and been studied, and then the neighborhood became very excited, and now there's a lot of new information that seems to turn it on its head. So my heart goes out to people who've been kind of charging ahead in one direction, and now with this new information, I just think there's a lot to think about. I don't think we should drop the ball because the issue is pedestrian safety. And if there is a way to accomplish that, I mean, if there's a way to do it without a $3 or $4 million project, maybe that's better anyway. But I just think, I'm just hoping that everyone can be patient and thoughtful, not let this issue go away, because I think it is a good one. I love the idea of a safe pedestrian loop that includes Huntley Meadow, and I'm hoping we can work this out. So.
Thanks, Mary. The only thing, if I may, is it's not new information. It was always in the feasibility study. It's just, it was this information or these concerns or what Rod is suggesting, a need for additional study was not centered in any discussions before or a part of the previous administration's work. So it's new in the first time that it's been centered, but it was in the feasibility study is what I would like to point out. But go ahead, Mary. And then
okay. Well, I think that's sort of true. Okay. Because it is, I think it was the emphasis. It was the push for the sidewalk. Yes. Other alternatives were mentioned, but also the pandemic, the price increases we were not aware of those, and those are definitely new information.
Right.
And then when it comes down to actually, being fair or even legal in what you're presenting to the voters, you do have to have a more accurate idea of cost. You just have to, if you're going to bring it up, if they have to decide something. So that's new in that when it's time to actually frame that, you do have to put that out there. So that was not apparent at that time.
Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's get to Marcia's question, Rod, if you could answer it. What does an additional study mean? Surely you can imagine for supporters of this project, it means more delay, more data, right? Things that, they may not necessarily see as advancing this project or addressing any concerns or, tying up any loose ends. So how could it address concerns and then also, if at all, advance the project?
Right. So I think thanks for the opportunity and thanks for the question, Marcia. And I just want to say at the outset that, I don't want to underestimate the breadth of support in the broader community for this project or the importance to a large number of people, regardless of where they live in Norwich, for the project. And I think that that's one of the more exciting aspects of the work that's been done today, which is to bring people together around this concept. And the notion of, I guess, a loop. So, okay. So I think the easiest way to describe it would be to think of it as some tape. You would rewind the tape. You would potentially hopefully use a different set of consultants so that you had different insights and perspectives from the professionals that were doing the work. and you would give them very closely described instructions about how to go forward, the alternative section in the existing feasibility study covers most of the known and accepted approaches to solving the bike pedestrian facility problem along that stretch of Beaver Meadow Road. So there's not anything terribly new to add to that. So it would be a change in emphasis, and it would be a much more detailed assessment of the costs and obstacles to achieving any of the projects or any of the approaches identified in the existing feasibility study. So it really would be a more meaningful update. But I think that the purpose of rewinding it would be to go back a little bit in time to regather the public and to sort of reorient their participation and involvement in it. Do it within the context of seeing this as one piece of a much larger project, which is the master plan for bike and pedestrian facilities for the town as a whole. See whether there are opportunities there to, gain access to Huntley Meadows at different points. For instance, the Kids Bridge, which is, slated to happen, which is down near the Legion on Beaver Meadow Road, which would allow bike ped access to that side of the Huntley Meadow area. So a variety of things that would actually slightly shift the context for this project and then drill down in much more detail on what the costs and obstacles are. And so that in that way, if the community is presented with that information, the community is making a much more informed choice about what the likely costs are going to be, even what the timelines are going to be. I think I would want to emphasize that from the standpoint of being the planning director and speaking on behalf of the Planning Commission, Action 11 is a really serious thing. Action item number 11 is a really serious thing for us in the town plan. We've had conversations with the Conservation Commission. We hope to start work on the master plan for sidewalks, paths, and trails in the new, in the March timeframe, February-March timeframe. So it's a really important opportunity for us, and we think that it's an important way of knitting together a bunch of other goals in the town plan. So I want to try and reassure the community and the people that are here tonight in particular that I don't think it's necessarily going to be a step back, or I think it is obviously going to necessitate taking more time, but I think it increases the likelihood of a successful outcome if it's done right. And I think that's the thing that I would really like to focus on. And I think that there's enough impetus in the town plan and enough impetus in the community to make sure that we actually can move forward on this. But we need to do it in a way that realistically addresses some of these things that I've discussed already tonight.
Okay.
I hope that helps you in understanding what the new feasibility study would look like.
I think so. Marcia, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah. So my worry with that is that any sort of cost prediction is going to be time sensitive because of the same problems that we've got right now. And I also worry if we're saying, if the public says, yes, we want to do this, assuming something gets on an article at some point, we've got to come up with chunks of money, and we've got to budget for those chunks of money. So it's going to be at least $200,000 a year. And I'm looking at, and maybe a lot more, but I'm looking at our budget and I'm thinking, how do we plan for that? We certainly haven't planned for it this year.
Right. Or I would say in the capital improvement plan that's drafted. Go ahead, Rod. So yes. So in what way does it buy us time to budget for anything that potentially would happen, and or else how else would you address Marcia's concern?
I'm glad that Marcia raised that point. There is actually a couple of examples in the feasibility study using, admittedly, and I acknowledge this from the outset, the same kind of oldish numbers as in 2020 numbers that the sidewalk project was, but they're in the range of $300,000. So even if that's doubled, that's a vastly different number from the number that we're contemplating now, right? It certainly would be a different scale project, and it would be a different outcome. You could regard it as an experiment or something temporary and then see if it was really successful and then reconsider what to do next. That would be something like a Sharrow like a seasonal share where one side of the road was basically dedicated to bike ped traffic in the summer and fall, and then it's basically they're glorified Jersey barriers. You would remove the barriers in winter, store them at the highway garage, and then let the road resume its current configuration for winter for the reasons to do with snow plowing and a bunch of other things. But that's a very low cost, easy, low entry cost way of assessing, whether this is a viable thing to do or not. And many communities engage in those kinds of experiments. And I think that Norwich is a really good setting for undertaking those kinds of experiments. And I would hope that a feasibility study would explore those things in more detail and engage the public in thinking about that and how to do that. From a budgetary standpoint, we've not made provision for the contribution to the 80-20 grant as proposed in this article. So we're not in a situation to do anything about it in the FY23 year. Given the calendar of when you would apply for that grant and then when it would be activated, the costs would not really come in until the end of FY23 or early FY24. So it would commit the select board and commit the town to a budgetary impact that's unknown now in FY24. And for public policy reasons, that's a very problematic thing to do. And so I feel like we should take the time now, before we've committed anything, to really understanding what the costs and the options are, and then present that to the voters and get them to commit to whatever that is once we've got more solid information. But so I hope that answers your question.
Kind of. So I have one more question, and then I do think we should take some public comment because we also are over time, not surprisingly, as Rob Gear would nicely point out to me. So Rod, what you're having this conversation, you mentioned action item number 11 a few times of the town plan. So what would be a work product in this rewind, as you're calling it? Would the work product be a master plan for sidewalks and trails that would more meaningfully focus on Beaver Meadow, or would it be additional feasibility study to test and pilot things around Beaver Meadow Road, or would it be a combination of both, right? How is it not just about, is there a work product for Action 11, or is it meeting a goal of Action 11 would be my question. Does that make sense?
Yes. Action 11 definitely envisages a work product. The work product would be a master plan. That would be a document. Hopefully it would be an electronic document. And of course, because it's a planning document, it would be a document that reflected broad public input. So it wouldn't just be a technocratic document. It would be a document that's formulated, in a similar but more narrow way than the town plan itself. So it would necessarily engage the public. It would address some technical issues, and it would make recommendations. And then hopefully the idea would be that the planning commission would approve this master plan, and then we go forward to the town, to the select board for you to approve. And so the feasibility study would nestle inside that to some extent by actually taking one chunk of that and addressing that in some detail. I think that it's reasonable to think at this point that if we're really going to try and advance the provision of bike ped facilities and we want to focus on this neighborhood as a place to start, then the feasibility study should contemplate that, but contemplate it within the context of the broader master plan, which has a work product which would be brought together by the planning commission and staff. Is how I would envisage it in the initial iteration. I don't think we've contemplated using outside consulting staff for that, but I think we would lean heavily on the regional planning commission.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Marcia. Go ahead, and then I'm going to take public comment. Okay.
Isn't this where, when we were talking about the capital budget for the financial policies, this is where we had identified that the capital budget really should be coming from recommendations in the town plan. And when you look at the town plan, this isn't one of the things that's listed, I think, but maybe that could be rejiggered because I think it needs to be fixed. And then we could start saying that, remember my whole discussion about capital budgeting under the town plan versus capital budgeting for the big ticket items we need to buy to keep the lights on. And I think starting to beef up that town plan capital budget is probably necessary. And as you say, this might be a good first project.
Yes, so the loop is, and Beaver Meadow is not identified in the town plan, but I think the idea of a potential warrant or other future action would be to make sure that it is centered as part of Action 11, which is obviously written to be a much broader goal. So yes, we would need like some other kind of visioning in order to implement the goals of the town plan, I guess. Let's take public comment because we've all talked a lot and folks have joined us, right? So I see Peter Orner as the hand. Go ahead, adding your spotlight.
Thanks, Roger. I just have a broad question and a couple specific questions. I won't take up too much time because I know other people have questions, but I did think that this discussion, Roger, especially from our communications before the meeting, this was going to be a discussion of the ballot warrant that we are petitioning, that we have over 200 signatures on. But I haven't really heard much of that. I've heard a broad criticism of the sidewalk project itself as it was laid out in a study that isn't binding at all. The study was the study that you all paid for, this town paid for, and it gave us some very good ideas of potentialities, but it certainly wasn't set in stone. And I feel like tonight we really talked way ahead of things. What we are trying to do, as you know, Roger, Mary, because I was communicating with you guys, is that we tried to create a non-binding warrant that would take the temperature of the town to decide if they would want you all to direct the town manager to apply for this 80/20 grant as a non-binding in a non-binding way. So, because of various comments that you all have made over the past couple of years, we've been to many meetings. We've asked for traffic calming measures, many of which were listed by the former town manager. Not one of them was implemented. And we discussed putting up a town warrant a long time ago. And I've been in touch with you, Roger, for the last 2 weeks about this warrant, and we have 200 signatures. So I think I would appreciate, and I know the people who signed the warrant would appreciate, a discussion of what the warrant attempted to do. Now, if we made a mistake in the wording, we're more than happy to discuss that. I spent a long time today talking to the Secretary of State's office. My understanding is that it's very clear. You all have the right, the discretionary right, to refuse to put any ballot up at all. And we respect that, and that's why we're here tonight. But there is nothing, as far as I could tell from the lawyer that I spoke to at the Secretary of State's office, that precludes you from putting up a warrant question to the voters in any language at all, frankly. And there's nothing in the law, as I see it, from the Secretary of State's website and from my long discussion with the lawyer today, that says that costs have to be included. However, if you all think that we should include costs, absolutely, let's do it. Let's put it to the voters with a certain cost number. Now, Rod said that the cost is now 2, or he said maybe 3 times as much as the initial estimates based on the study. Now, I think Elliot in the chat asks where Rod's getting that information from. I mean, we're assuming that. I guess my question would be are you putting a 3 times cost estimate on everything we're doing in Norwich? Does every budgetary item now times 3? Because I would like to see that for sure. But I would like I would like a discussion of the fact that I have a great deal of respect for Rod. I've worked with Rod. I think he's wonderful. You should hire him as town manager. But I think this discussion, as far as I understand, from the Secretary of State's office, is really a select board decision, a discretionary decision, whether or not to put up a warrant ballot up. Now, if the lawyer says, be careful, I respect that too. But we would like to work with you all on putting this up. And I do think that some of the things that Rod mentioned, especially, Teslas and things like that. I'm not sure that that is exactly relevant to the 200 people that signed a petition because they think that Beaver Meadow isn't safe and that they want the loop completed. So the last thing I want to say is we've also been in touch with people with VTrans, and we've gotten a lot of wonderful feedback and support. So the idea that because another grant was given because of other conditions in a different town, from what I understand and from what our discussions with VTrans, and Andy could probably speak to this more, is that that's not necessarily criteria that they're using. So I feel like some of the information we're getting, with all respect, might not be supported by the totality of the circumstances as we understand it. So again, we want to work with you all about putting up a measure that would take the temperature of the town, but not bind us in any financial way. That was what we tried to do based on our discussions with Roger, Mary, and other people on the board. And I just, we have discussed, and you have all said, whether or not there has been a major accident on Beaver Meadow or not, as Rod mentioned. All of you in different capacity have noted how dangerous the road is for walkers. So, that I think that especially the 200 people that signed and many more people in town would certainly take issue with the fact that Beaver Meadow is a safe place to walk, especially this time of year. I have other things to say, but I'm going to defer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments for the moment? Go ahead, Andy Shear.
Thank you. I guess a couple things. I also just take issue a little bit with the numbers. Does anybody remember 2008? So we've gotten into this situation where we're looking at this crazy inflation, but we also have these unpredictable crashes too. Who knows where we'll be? But I think, the best, in my opinion, the best assessment is where we are in a normal year, pre-COVID. Like, who's to say we're not going to return to that, after the supply chain issue is fixed in 2 to 3 years. I have a handful of things here, but the $600,000 that the town's responsibility would be, that's 1 year of the police budget. This would be a permanent structure in our town for generations as a result of this. Now, at the most, if it is the $3 million that Rod says, but I just want to point that out. This is physical infrastructure that will be with us. It's not police cruisers that are deteriorating and all this stuff. This would be with us for a long time. So I think it's a sound investment in our town and safety. We could talk about $3 million lawsuit against the town if someone's hit by a car. Speaking of which, someone was just killed in Thetford, unfortunately. And I hate to bring that up and weaponize it, but it's the reality. The roads are unsafe. I totally love the idea of rods, one way, but taking that away in the winter, the people who live on that road are bound to their cars because it is unsafe to walk there. I do agree with Rob, rather, that we need to take a temperature of the town. And I don't know how to do that. And I would like to ask Rod, you had said you can't ask for permission and ask for the money in the same time. And I want to know then, how are we to go about this? Then what is the process to do that? And, what is the timeline of this action item number 11? I think people are pretty frustrated that it has been years of, being led down this path only to have it just go away. So I think that's pretty frustrating for people. So think that, and I just want to, kind of highlight something Marcia had said, a couple months ago is, we're talking about safety. There is a broader safety picture here in the town, whether it's policing, whether it's dogs in the dog park, but I feel like if we want to have safety as a priority, this is a very concrete, no pun intended, thing that we could have to increase the safety for everyone. All right, I will stop and let you have your.
Thank you. And just, I've been thinking and not watching the clock. So apologies. I'm going to start making sure that we try to stick to 3 minutes. Elliot, I believe that you are next.
Okay. Elliot Harik, 27 Hillside Road.
Just a couple quick things. One, just wanted to voice support for the general sentiment of trying to gauge the temperature and interest on the project. I don't know exactly what the path forward is. We thought the warrant would do it, but if not, I think I would really appreciate if the board could try to figure out a way to get this done so you guys can get a better picture of a wider swath of what the town wants. And then the second thing is, I kind of went emotionally vacillated when Rod was talking, from being frustrated to being, really excited about this master plan. That sounds wonderful. I love the idea of this master plan and figuring out how this loop fits in to the broader vision of the town. But I am deeply skeptical that gets done anytime in the near future. And so the reason the warrant came to be is because we weren't seeing any traction on this effort. And so I guess I would just say, gosh, that sounds great. Article 11 sounds great. Love it. Love to see you guys take the lead and actually run with it and make it happen. I just kind of feel a little bit hands in the air, because my hopes and best wishes for you guys taking action haven't gotten us very far thus. And I understand the wheels move slowly, but I'd like to see them moving at all. So, and Rod, I know you're interim. I don't know how long that lasts. Sounds like you've got a great vision for what you want to see happen and some great ideas on how to make it happen. But if you're not here in 6 months, tough cookies. So for the rest of us who are here. So I guess that's just my way of saying, please find a way to make forward action on this. And whether that's in the guise of the master plan or an ad hoc project, I don't know, but I implore you to find a way forward on this project.
Okay, thanks so much. Are there any more public comments? Because we've heard, I do want to get back to board discussion, only because the things that have just been articulated, I know are board member concerns too, right? So we have to figure out how we're going to resolve that. And we have to also be mindful of time and our full agenda, of course. So I think taking the temperature, as it's been called, as people have phrased it, I think is a board member interest. And I think I've heard that a little bit from folks in previous discussions. And then this business of the legal advice. The only thing I would say is, yes, it's true that the board can't be compelled by voter petition to put this on because it's not in voter authority to do so. But yes, Peter is accurate that we could choose to do so and choose to make advisory clear if we would like to. Of course, the advice from entities like the LCT is that voters will hold you to it regardless of advisory or not. And we would have to think about ethically, as sort of Elliot was saying, what is in our actual ability and capacity to achieve if we hear something one way or another. So I see there's more public comment, but I want to get back to this question of the Rod. I guess I'll turn to you a little bit. Would the desire, folks are looking to sort of do a service for the board, right? As much as they're looking to put, good pressure on us, right? To in terms of performing and making progress, how would additional work that you have sort of been proposing force that temperature, and how quickly can it be delivered while also acknowledging that the Planning Commission is engaged in a major zoning rewrite, a density study, and a wastewater study?
If I understand your question correctly, it's okay, acknowledging the importance of this pursuing this project or this concept, and acknowledging that it fits under the rubric of action item number 11 in the town plan. How do I envisage both staff and the Planning Commission proceeding with the work? Is that your question?
Yes, right. I think that's
okay.
A great question. So, how can we take a temperature outside of a warrant process, right? Where there's some
right. I think that taking the temperature question is a good one, and I think it's a question that I don't want to elongate this discussion too much, but I think to take it back to you as a select board and then the people that are in the room tonight to discuss what's the most appropriate way of, as the term is being used, take the temperature of the public. From the standpoint of me and staff and the Planning Commission is involved in a large amount of work right now, and we're moving with deliberate speed. The density study is not a major time sink for the Planning Commission or staff. The consequences of it will, the output of that study will hopefully cause the Planning Commission to do a lot of thinking and discussing of next steps. But that's not likely to arrive until the spring. The wastewater study doesn't start until the spring. The idea that we could fit another project in, like beginning to work on a master plan for the sidewalks, paths, and trails, is conceivable, and it's the expectation that we would start working on that in the spring, late winter, early spring. So what does that mean for the people in the room tonight, including the select board? Well, it would obviously the master plan part would start pretty slowly. The expectation is that we would work with the Conservation Commission and tap the knowledge of the trail subcommittee to some extent as well. But look at this from the point of view of, in the first instance, I think, look at the existing assets that we have, including the sidewalk network in the village, and then the paths and trails that we know exist, and how to enhance those, and how to increase people's access to those facilities, and then increase their use. So nested in that would be the question of how to go about improving bike and pedestrian safety, and particularly in the village and adjacent areas, which is where the Beaver Meadow project would come in. And I feel like that particular issue needs to be explored with more technical assistance, which is why I think yet another study is warranted here. I would expect, depending on how we would go about funding that, for that process to be able to start up in the late summer, fall. But that makes some assumptions about staffing in town. That makes an assumption that there'll be a new town manager and a planning director and a zoning administrator to free up staff resources to actually do that. So not, I have some reservations about that in the short term, but I think that that's operating on the assumption that the staff positions will be filled. And I think, I understand the frustration in the room about how long this has taken, and the sort of notion that that this feasibility study feels like a dead end. I think, going back to the temperature question, if the people in the room, including the select board, are comfortable with putting an advisory article on the warning, then I think that one possibility is that we could table this question and then come back at a subsequent meeting with a draft article that's advisory, that meets the expectations of the people, or at least works through the expectations of the people in the room. I think that using an advisory article in that manner carries some risks, but I think that the question for the town, certainly from the administration, from the staff point of view, is we definitely are eager to make progress on the question of bike and pedestrian facilities in the town.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So thanks, Rod. So I see more public comment. What I would like to do, I'm going to take more public comment, and then we need to wrap up this discussion because we're on like 1/5 of this agenda item. I want to take some more public comment, and then I want to ask the board members if they would like to either proceed with an advisory article about the sidewalk, or if they would like, because this is what I'm hearing from the discussion, or if they would like us to work towards a different article, monetary or advisory, that reflects some of the conversations that I suppose we're hearing from Rod. I think these are or do nothing. So I think these are the options. I don't think we should do nothing. Okay. Let me take more public comment. Peter, I saw your physical hand. Was your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to ask if we're going to talk about the warrant that we had over 200, I think it's 230 now, signatures about. And I think all of us who worked really hard would really appreciate that. I feel like I respect what Rod is having to say in a larger sense, but our attempt was very limited here, and we made that well known. And so I for one would have appreciated sort of knowing in advance that this was going to be a substantive discussion about the feasibility of actually doing it versus a non-binding ballot measure that we tried to word that way, where we were going to ask, would you like the town to apply for a grant that would mostly pay for a sidewalk on Beaver Meadow? Now, of course, we understand that a lot else goes into that, but that was a question that was designed to understand if there was support. And if I remember from Marcia saying it many times, she really wanted to know what the town wants. And this is what we are attempting to do. So I would appreciate if you guys would address that question with all respect. And we would love to work with you in the coming days on it. Thank you.
Okay. Andy?
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to make sure, I don't think anyone wants a $3 million sidewalk, that they're going to have to pay out of pocket. And so I think it needs to be clear that a grant or some additional outside funds is responsible. Now that this $3 million number is going, I could hear Stuart saying, oh, now it's a $3 million sidewalk, and that gets used against us and against this project. And I want to make sure that whatever language or whatever comes out, it's clear that we are searching for grant funding to cover the majority to make this the least impact on the town itself. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. And then all I can say for my part is I tried to facilitate a conversation that got us further on the goals of the project. So I'm sorry if this is not the vision of the conversation that was expected from members of the public. That being said, I'm going to turn to the board a little bit. What was it like hearing all of this? What would folks like? Are there any thoughts on next steps?
Roger, I just make sure you give a little time for maybe some more public comment. I know Andy and I have sort of spoken a lot, but I know there's other people who might want to speak if you give them a little time to.
I appreciate that. I can give a little more time. We're really over time, but of course I can.
I just want to make sure there wasn't. That's all.
Yeah, but I want to identify the next steps by the board. Any thoughts from folks? We could. This is a draft warrant discussion. Marcia, you're on mute.
There. Sorry. I think as drafted, you kind of have to agree with legal counsel that we're asking the voters to go in a place which is going to obligate them to an unknown. And I also think, as Rod mentioned, it's advisory articles are not a good idea. So I'm sort of playing with this idea that maybe everybody would think about the existing Article 8 on the draft warrant. If we took 200,000 out of that, because basically this comes down to money, and we have to figure out what we're going to do, and we have to do something in the interim so that we have something in the works and maybe something long-term. So if we took $200,000 instead of $800,000 from the retiring undesignated fund balance and put that into the reserve and use that towards increasing or starting out a fund, a reserve fund for a bike and pedestrian safety plan for the village. which leaves us 600,000 for Article 8. And then from Article 10, reduce the 60,000 for the undesignated retiring, undesignated fund balance for the operational performance and development. Reduce that to 51, which would cover Article 11, the police and safety budget, and use the 9 and create a new article, whatever, which would be to take $9,000 to implement some safety measures temporarily for Beaver Meadow Road, because we haven't implemented anything yet. And if we can do something that isn't actually going to have to be rejiggered in the future, maybe that would help. One of the things, Rod, you've mentioned a couple of times, I can't remember what you call it, but the 1 lane thing, I just see that with all of the traffic coming back and forth from out in Sharon, it seems to me that that would put undue pressure on the bridge, that bridge over whatever, Moore Lane or whatever, and, cause us more problems. So I don't know what that answer is, but I'm thinking maybe we can do something for $9,000. But that gets us moving the needle in some direction.
So obviously, out the cost question, I think we can, we can ask for more work from town staff potentially for that too. Any other approaches that people would like to recommend, including, moving it on as advisory as is? That was never off the table. It was just inadvisable from council. Glenda?
I would like us to try to simplify the article to just get to gauging the sentiment of the voters and if they want to pursue this. And pardon me?
With no costs or mentioning of the grant program? We clearly don't have a cost. We have an old estimated cost. So, certainly the wording of the warrant of the article could be that acknowledging that there could possibly be grant money. But just to gauge, I want to bring us back to let's get the temperature of the town. I think Marcia's suggestion on pulling 200,000 out, I would really want, I think that's an entirely separate discussion that I don't know the implications of the ramifications, what that brings us down to for an emergency reserve fund, that I'd want that info, and I don't want to discuss it tonight. But I would just really want a very simple article that gauges the sentiment of the voters. Is this something that the voters would be in support of, knowing that it could cost up to whatever? I understand, Roger, the hesitancy to put an article out there without, I guess I just want us to do something. Right now, even the people that participated in the Dubois study, that was less than a third of, or less than, probably be about a quarter of the registered voters in town. So, I just want to know what the sentiment of the voters in town is to even have further discussions about a sidewalk. Okay. Mary, do you have anything?
I don't know. I think this discussion has made it more confusing in terms of making a decision. But my gut sort of says maybe we need to think more broadly. And if we have an advisory vote, something like, doesn't every Norwich resident walking or biking near the village deserve to have a safe path, something like that? Because it really is about safety. It's also about health. But I think that if you put an advisory vote out that's something along that lines, it would sound ridiculous.
Right.
So it's hard to know specifically what to say. I think, the concerns about cost make me want to say, let's just not put this on the warrant at all, because there's so many unknowns, and the inflationary costs and just cost of materials going up even without inflation, and the unknowns are so much, I think it would be irresponsible to put it on. And the voters who are considering it, I think that everybody wants to be able to walk down the street or ride a bike or push a stroller and not get hit by a car. So if you're asking them that, everybody's going to say, yeah, I don't want that to happen. But then if you're proposing a specific solution, then that's a little different. You've got to try to, and also that because it's a 50-year, if it's a sidewalk, maybe it's a 50-year investment. That's really mind-boggling to think about, that Rod was bringing in this idea that the vehicles might be autonomous. It's a little hard to wrap my mind around it. So in the interest of not doing harm, weighing out what's the least harm, I would say just don't put this on the warrant at this time.
Okay. I think my only thing I will say is, I think if you request an additional feasibility study for Beaver Meadow Road, and I think that's an excellent way to take the temperature of the town. I think it would signal that work is advancing on this project and that we are committing even more additional funds to it. It puts additional pressure on us to create an answer, not necessarily a sidewalk, but I think money is a way to signal your seriousness. And so I don't think we can commit to an engineering or a capital item, particularly since we also want to approve a capital budget right now. But I do think we should put additional funds that, will inherently take the temperature. And I do think we should center it within town plan goals. It makes the town plan not just a pithy document, but something that actually has seriousness. So I guess if anything, I want some mentioning of the master plan. I want that work product done, and I want the sidewalk to be a part of it, or a separate feasibility study for its money. Put money towards it. So I kind of like the last part of what Marcia was suggesting. And or unfortunately nothing. I think it would be unethical to seek an advisory article on this right now. That doesn't mean I don't appreciate the work. I feel rather tormented about taking that position, quite frankly. This is totally a grassroots effort, right? That's all I got. Rob, do you have anything?
I'm concerned that we would need to do something, and we would need to do something that committed money, because otherwise we're stymied. We can't afford to have any more studies if we don't allocate the funds in advance. So how one words changes the wording of the document to accommodate a concrete advance in the project without committing the town to huge sums that are unknown at this time. I don't have the skill set to come up with something like that off the top of my head, but I think we need to make a commitment to improving the safety of that area, improving the quality of life for the town as a whole, and do that in a way that puts us moving forward.
Okay, so thank you, Rob. So Marcia, one more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rod because he's been listening to us, and maybe he can provide a path forward for a more final version of a warrant, potentially. And then we have to, and then an article, sorry. And then we got to take a break, quite frankly. So go ahead, Marcia.
So what about an article that says, shall the voters of the town of Norwich approve the spending of up to X from the Operational Performance and Development Fund to undertake a name the study ROD, and then up the amount of money that goes into the Operational Performance and Development Fund.
I support that. Yeah. Hi, Claudette.
Well, kind of along those lines, and instead of taking 200,000 out of the emergency reserve, if we took 50,000 out of the emergency reserve, as well as the 60,000. So if we up that to at least have the money there, if we go the feasibility or even split it out further,
yes,
to dedicate X numbers of dollars for safety improvements.
Right. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, I would support that. The thing is, I would like to see us do something now. I don't know what that something is, whether it's a light or whatever, but something that isn't going to break the bank and we can fund. And I don't know where we're going to get that money either, but something.
Right, begin piloting or directed foot patrol or something else. I hear you. And we only paused on that as an agenda item because I had some conversations and thought that we would be hearing from folks about their ideas, but we need to lead on it. So I hear that. So I'm going to take some more public comments, Linda Cook, and then we really got to take a break and then pursue in like part 2 of the warrant. This agenda. Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you. I think that I know there's a lot of energy into this project, but I think I was at Planning Commission last night. They are talking about Trails Committee, Conservation Committee, as Rod pointed out, the Planning Commission. They're all looking at the entire town and trying to bundle the action, the walking, the biking, the cars, and come up with a project that works going forward as opposed to short-term, let's fix one problem. And then the next question is, how are we going to pay for the maintenance of that? Because some of you will remember Church Street was put out this way with not quite all the information possibly. And we had to turn around and pay the money back because when we got to the project being done, most of the people in that street had moved or sold their houses, and we didn't have the next group of people supporting it as heavily. So we've seen what can happen, and I think everyone should be encouraged. Now everybody is at the table. Give them time to work out as a group to plan what the plan should be going forward as opposed to individual groups. And I think we will get a project that will really fit most of the idea of the people in town. For the safety part, maybe we could improve that a little bit. But
Bosco,
something
Gibbs, can you get him? Oh, sorry.
What was that? Somebody have a hiccup there?
Yes, that's right. It was a hiccup. Go ahead, Linda, but thank you.
Yeah, well, that's all I'm trying to say is I think the awareness is out there to the community, but seeing only 300 signatures or a quarter of the town having input on that, that's one thing that concerns me, of not reaching more people. And that's always been a problem. And we've done surveys. When I was on the board, we did surveys. Other people have done surveys. We've just got to be able to engage the public that we've got in this town and see if this is a good plan, which once it all gets put together, I think we're going to go forward well with it. But I think we need a little more patience. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, thanks. Any more public comments? And then Rod, I won't turn to you because I think you've been listening to us. So yes. Andy, share, unless, is there any other member of the public who would like to make a public comment? Okay, go ahead, Andy, share.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in asking a question that like Marcia and Claudette were just talking about, I just want to make sure that people aren't voting on there's the dollar value they're proposing. And so people could be voting on the dollar value that you're proposing, but they're also voting on the issue. And so I just want to make sure that you're like, teasing those out, you're not saying like, because if you say, are we going to spend $500,000 to vote on this feasibility study? They're going to say no. But if you say $50,000, they'll be like, oh yeah. So I just want to make sure that it's clear about like the dollar value versus the issue that you're wanting to get at. So that's all.
Yeah. No, thank you. Any other comments from anyone? Go ahead, Peter, I see your hand.
I guess I just have a question. What would you guys advise that we tell our, the constituents that we took time, over a week period to collect, not 300, Linda, but we could get 300 if you want 300, but 200 plus signatures and having long discussions about this. I'm just wondering, I'd love some guidance because, I think it is going to be frustrating to hear that you all didn't even vote on it, or I'd appreciate that. Just kind of like, again, addressing the language that Andy brought, and I understand the hesitation on an advisory article, but that was the advice we were given by some of you. So I'm as confused now as I was before, and I'm also a little bit befuddled about what I'm going to say. Like, well, it's because of self-driving cars? I mean, what are we going to tell the people that signed this warrant that wanted to see this? And we were very clear. It's advisory. I had a number of people sign that would vote against. So I guess that's my question: is where are we at, and what are we going to what can I and others that collected signatures that are here tonight tell the people that we talked to?
Sure. Sure. I think that's rhetorical, but I'm happy to answer.
No, it's not rhetorical at all. Honestly, Roger, it's not. And it's,
thank you.
I want some advice.
Yes. So thank you. I'm going to give a suggestion. I'll turn to board members if they would like to answer it. Then I'm going to turn to Rod, and then we're going to take a break. So I would say is that we heard people's passion and concerns about seeing this project advance. It was inadvisable to proceed with the warrant, inadvisable by our attorneys to proceed with the warrant as drafted, but their grassroots effort added significant good pressure to their elected officials who took to identify technical answers to some of the concerns that were brought up in the earlier feasibility study in order to advance the goals of the town plan for pedestrian and bike work.
I'm not sure I can get all that, but I did. Can I just have a follow-up question, Roger?
You may, and then I'm going to turn to Rod, and then I'm going to move on, take a break.
Great.
Okay.
But you're saying on advice of attorneys, you guys are not even addressing the ballot measure, which is, as far as I can understand, perfectly legal. So it's advice of the town attorney, but the town attorney is not a select board member, and neither is the acting town manager. So I guess what I was looking for, Roger, is we're going to table this and discuss how to create a warrant that's going to address the issues that people brought up, and not, I don't think I can follow what you said, to be honest. Sorry.
I think the board members discussed the petition in good faith and did the best work that we could, and will continue in a new draft of the warrant. And would board members like to say anything further before I turn to Rod about what the next steps will be before a break?
It's a draft of an article, not a warrant.
Sorry, yes. Article on the warrant.
I think it does matter, the specific language. And, it does, I think when we vote on anything, it is on the specific language. And if we're voting, someone moves it and seconds it, and it goes up and down. So it's more difficult to get at a definitive answer in a freewheeling discussion. And also there may be a better solution that comes out of this conversation, though. And it will be hard to go back to the neighborhood and say, wow, we worked really hard to get to this point. But I think in a larger context, we have to think of the whole town. That's the other thing. So we're sort of in a different position.
I just want to clarify again, as Roger did earlier, Mary, it's not the neighborhood. This is a town-wide effort. It is not the neighborhood. So I just want to clarify that, as Roger did earlier.
we acknowledge that. Thank you. Any other board members would like to provide an assist for their poor chair before I turn it over to Rod? Go ahead, Claudette.
I guess I would acknowledge that the board received quite poor advice from our previous town manager. And we have always acted in good faith. And there have been opportunities missed by this current board for sure, and by previous boards. But we are trying to do the right thing. And I know you know that we are, and unfortunately, they may not mesh.
Right.
Unfortunately, at this point in time.
Thank you, Claudette. Rod, summarize where you think we are right now, what you'll be doing for us in the short order, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break.
I have to confess, I'm a little bit like Peter. I'm kind of losing the plot here. I think what I'm hearing is a proposal first outlined by Marcia, subsequently modified, I think, in a friendly manner from Claudette, that would attempt to achieve a financial commitment to further study on the question of the Beaver Meadow bike head facility by changing the language in some of the other draft articles so if I got this right, reduce the figure in Article 8 from $800,000 to $750,000, and subsequently increase the amount in
Article 10 to $110,000, reflecting the shift of $50,000 from the earlier article to the Operational Performance and Development Fund, giving that a new balance of $110,000, and then a new article that would ask the voters to approve a feasibility study that that revisited the earlier feasibility study, and I think I had a better word for it than revisit. Can I help?
Please.
Yeah, you can help.
I think what I had suggested was, shall the voters of the town of Norwich approve the spending of up to X from the, I think 50,000 now, from the Operational Performance and Development Fund to undertake, and I think we should just give it a new name rather than revisit a study, because it is a new study.
Right.
Right. Yep. So a further study of bike and pedestrian facilities on Beaver Meadow Road. In ultimate furtherance of Action 11 of the 2020 Town Plan, which is to develop a master plan for sidewalks, paths, and trails.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Which, if approved by the voters, is the temperature monitor of the people in town.
Are you suggesting that language in the article, Marcia?
I'm suggesting that that's the effect. If you want to put some bolstering language in there.
Marcia is suggesting make the study, approval of the study, indicative of the interest in the project more squarely. Claudette, Rod's going to ruminate that. Claudette, go ahead, and then.
Yeah, and I. With Article 8, leave the 800,000 there. Don't drop that, but just when we are shifting money from the emergency reserve to these other funds. Shift 50,000 to the whatever we want to call it now.
Right. Okay. So yes, the first. Okay. Yeah. The first step is to move it into an emergency reserve fund, and then. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's okay. We can figure that out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rod,
so I think I can put something together like that during the break, and then come back with a slightly more coherent text if that helps people, particularly the audience, get a clearer sense of where they're going. And then I just want to emphasize for Peter and all the people that have put a lot of work into this that I understand the frustration, and I would want to give an undertaking that it's it's certainly some clumsiness to do with the state funding system, but I feel like if this article was to be voted on affirmatively by the voters, then I think that would give a really clear direction to staff and the Planning Commission to pursue this.
Right. Go ahead, Marcia. I think you're going to get the last word if that's okay.
Yes. Just wondering how we get from there to something happening in the interim. A small thing to help the traffic.
I think we have to table that question, but it's a very, very good one. Okay. If I may. Okay. It's 8:37. Why don't we come back at 8? I'm asking y'all because how do you feel about 8:45? Coming back? Okay. I'll see you then. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you at 8:45.
Recording stopped.
Marcia and Mary, are you with us? Yeah. I'm going to start. I know that Marcia will join us.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I'm resuming the January 12th Select Board meeting at 8:45. Claudette, do you have a question?
I do. Instead of struggling to have Rod come up with language article, can we just wait?
Yes, Rod and I just talked about that. Yep.
And then my second point is just looking at the rest of the agenda, since we just received word from VLCT today that the ARPA final language for what the funds can be used for was presented. If we can't table, as much as I am loath to say we have a meeting next week, I would suggest that we have a meeting next week. ARPA.
I think it's fine. The agenda item was very limited in scope to understand if generators and Tracy Hall could be, if there's more clarity on those particulars, because we ultimately wanted to prove a CIP. So I just really wanted to answer these questions, which we may be in a position to do, and then we can move on. So we won't do more than that. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so let's get into the second half of agenda item 5, which is the draft warrant. All right, so the second petition that has been circulated, and again, I haven't had a conversation with Bonnie to see progress or if it was certified, but in the spirit of the work that our community does, I want to give an opportunity to hear a little bit about it from some of the folks who petitioned, and then we'll go from there, depending on the outcome of the conversation. So this measure asks to eliminate the office of the listers and work with a professional qualified assessor under the terms defined in the statute. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Flanders a little bit to talk about this petition.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I'll try to summarize quickly that basically we recommend that the board put an article on the town warning to allow a vote whether to eliminate the office of lister, and here's why. In 2011, the Committee to Review Real Property Assessment Functions reported on this topic, and the Select Board at the time adopted the model where there would be a contract assessor under the supervision of the town manager, who is the purchasing agent of the town, with the listers remaining in office to be the first line of appeal. And that group suggested that there be townwide reappraisals every 5 years. However, the board at the time realized that if we did a 3-year rotation of every property in town, it would obviate the need for a townwide reappraisal, because basically it would be done at such a high rate. Now you have before you the history, or I've shared with you the history of the CLA, which I'll explain in a moment, from that time on. So basically we started at a CLA of 90 when the Select Board acted on that in 2011, and it quickly rose to 99, which is close to 100, which is the target. It dipped once during that period until 2020, when in 2021 it started to descend back to where it's now in the 90s again. And so let me just explain the importance of CLA. The CLA means the common level of appraisal, which you have an ideal number of 100, which means that your town is assessing property correctly in proportion to the sales that are going on in that town that reflect the real property prices. So if you have a CLA of 90, you're falling behind that, and the state will penalize you in terms of how much you have to pay into the state pool for the poor job that you've done. So Norwich currently ranks at the bottom 8% of towns for achieving accuracy of CLA, whereas a whole 26% of Vermont towns maintain a CLA that's within 2 points of 100, up or down. So basically, the select board is not allowed to advise the listers how to do their job. However, this is, to me, the right time to allow the voters to vote whether to eliminate the office of lister and contract with or employ a professionally qualified assessor with the same powers to discharge the same duties. In doing so, that would allow the town manager to reassert the proper role of that manager to be the contracting entity under the supervision of the select board to contract the property assessing function. It would allow the select board to explore and implement best practices as such may be identified by citizen communities that it may appoint if needed. And it would avoid the discord that sometimes occurred in the lister function. And there's a record of unoccupied positions and resignations there, which basically suggests that it's not an office that's sought after by qualified individuals at large. I'm not sure there are very many such individuals in the population of Norwich. And so to that end, there is a petition that's been circulated. Liz Blum will speak to that, but our experience has been that 90% of those who have been asked to sign have agreed to do so. And the article that would result is by under statute, and I won't read that to you until you request that. So that's my summary.
Okay, thanks, Steve. You suggested that Liz would like to also say something as part of this petition. Liz Blum?
That's me.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Roger. So as I mentioned before, I was a Norwich lister for 6 years. And when I became a lister, there was no assessor. Listers carried out assessments for which none of us was trained or qualified to do. This arrangement lasted through the first grand list of my term. The Norwich Selectboard voted to hire a professional contract assessor. From 2012 to 2017, the Selectboard, with input from the listers, contracted with an assessor. The town manager oversaw the assessor's contract, which included the provision to assess 1/3 of the town every year. The town's goal for the assessor was to achieve as high a common level of appraisal as possible in order to reduce our property tax bills. He and his team commenced a townwide reappraisal for 2013. The assessor later carried out a second reappraisal for 2016, and this system really worked well. There was less litigation and residents were much more satisfied. The evidence is in the numbers that Steve has presented to you, the select board. The company hired as the contract assessor achieved high CLAs, as Steve has said, and shown in the history that he presented. After the 2016 townwide reappraisal, the contract assessor chose not to renew his contract with the town. For a few years, the assessments that gave us a high CLA remained valid. Then the CLA rating began to decline, making us liable for higher property tax payments to the state. The Board of Listers has not successfully maintained a high CLA. It is difficult to find qualified candidates for the office of lister. Furthermore, those who run the office usually lack the skill set necessary to write an effective contract. The town manager is better qualified to write and supervise such contracts. I recommend that the lister of office be eliminated and that the function be managed by contracting with a trained assessor hired by the town manager and the elected select board with the goal of delivering a professional product for Norwich. And I want to underscore what I said before, that the request for quotations that the listers have put out has failed to produce a single qualified candidate. And there was only one receipt one response from a poorly qualified candidate. And I think we need to look seriously at this, and we do need to do a reappraisal, but we have to get our house in order first. And if you want me to read the warrant article, I will be happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's okay because it's in statute. Yes. So the only thing I will add is if this my understanding is this has about at least 85 signatures, right? And there would be another day if folks were to continue that petitioning effort.
Actually, we have 102 signatures, but we're not as intrepid as the sidewalk people. So, but we only started a week ago, and we will try to get the required amount. Thank you.
Right, and we appreciate the heads up because 165, and my understanding is this is something that the voters do control, right? And so if this were to receive 165, it would be on a measure, right? So we have the benefit of a little bit of discussion, and we could also, of course, like the advisory article earlier, we could potentially add this on ourselves. Steve, do you have one follow-up? And then I want to go to board members a little bit on this.
So we've had a 90% success ratio getting people to sign when presented. So we're basically, the momentum is to reach the number. And we were actually shooting for the November election as a time to put the article on the warrant. So you have the option to wait for us to do that, or do it now if you think the timing is better.
Okay. And then the only other thing, if I may, I will say is if this were to be successfully voted on, it would be 45 days to choose a professional qualified assessor. And obviously the office will undergo a structural rechange. Okay. Any board member conversations on this? I think Claudette was first.
So I have a couple of comments. Just one is, because people sign a petition doesn't mean that they are necessarily in support of a petition. That's one. The other is, I guess I am not inclined to support this petition because I think this discussion is one that needs to be much more detailed than just having a question out on the town meeting warrant. I'm not sure that there are enough people that understand the role of the listers. Plus, we've had a contract assessor in that office with the listers. So it's not something that the listers have been doing independent of a contract assessor. I would also argue that there are other towns in this state who have contract assessors who have seen just as much of a drop in CLA. So it's not something that is unique to towns that have listers only or a lister plus professional assessors. But bottom line, I don't think I would be more inclined to support this on the November ballot because I think it's something that we as a town need to have significantly more discussion about the pros and cons. And we have absolutely no idea if we could even get, if this were on the warning and it was approved by the voters, we have absolutely no idea if there's anybody even out there that we could hire.
Okay, thank you, Claudette. Marcia, your hand.
No, thank you. I'm not inclined to support this either, and for several reasons. It seems to me from what's been explained, and looking at the very old 2011, I guess, report from whatever committee was structured to give advice about this, it looks like we followed that advice for the structure. And I'm not sure that the bad CLA can be entirely blamed on the listers, especially given what I've read lately. I mean, the first time I heard about CLA was in the context of the pandemic and how the numbers had been so dramatically skewed in lots of towns because of the escapees to the country. So I don't think that we're doing any service to the town by losing the listers, because we would lose them within 45 days. And that means, it's happening at the same time. And I know that we have some lead time with this, but we are going to have to do a reappraisal. So I would much rather continue, especially because we need so much more information. Every time the taxes come out, there's the possibility of grievances. And what are we then doing? Are we paying someone extra money to represent, the lister function in front of the Board of Civil Authority? I just think there are way too many questions unanswered that we need to address. And I don't see that the listers are at fault for what's happened with the CLA, at least in the short term.
Okay, thank you, Marcia. Any other board member comments? I think Mary was first.
I just appreciate more time to think about it. I think there are some questions that, we could look into a little bit more and perhaps put it on the November ballot. But I think right now it's too rushed.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Rob?
I would support it for a later ballot also. However, it has been a subject that's come up off and on over the years and has been a source of some contention with logical arguments on both sides. But I think it's worthwhile planning on it being ready for November.
Okay. The only thing I will add is I do think, the CLA is arbitrary as much as it is carefully constructed and curated and managed, right? So I agree that, the CLA might not be the best indication of the lister performance. What I do think is a strong indication of lister performance is the grievance process, right? And I think we don't necessarily the state doesn't necessarily collect the data of how many times things have been overturned in a grievance process, right? Because if the BCA overturns a decision of the listers, I think that's a pretty strong indication of whether or not they've made good decisions, right? Because so looking at the appeal process, I think is something, and we all have, of course, anecdotes in serving on the BCA, and I think we have qualified insights into that, right? The other thing I worry about is similarly how relationships, I think being in relationship with our community and other professionals is everything. And I wonder very openly and honestly and transparently if the relationships are maintained well. I think the office is known to be often in conflict with the people they work with, and sometimes the community. The only last point is, I think some of these folks who take on the lister's role work relentlessly and admirably, and they're voted in by the voters, but there's not necessarily competitive elections. And so I actually think that the process is not particularly democratic, but perhaps a burden, right? I imagine that when you do that work, you feel a real sense of duty. And when you see that the office is not attracting other interest from people looking to serve, you end up doing it as if it's a job. I won't speak for the listers, but I worry about that burden for future generations. And I think that in and of itself is a reason to consider an assessor model. So I would support it for those reasons, but I think I'm actually far more practical on this. And I do think people will have the juice to come forward in November, and it might be a good time to, well, it may or may not, I honestly don't know. It might be a good time to think about how this would reconfigure potentially and everything else that is happening with the reappraisal in the office, or it may very well be the very worst time. I don't actually know. So that's my spiel. I would say, like, look at the grievance process, look at the relationships that are built and maintained, and look at to what extent this is actually a burden for the folks who are doing like a real civic duty, right? But I don't know. That's all. That's what I got. We have some public comments from former and current listers. So I think Dennis Coffin, you were first.
Thank you. Dennis Coffin, 535 Campbell Flat Road. 50 years here. Now 51. Who's counting? I was a lister for over 15 years. I went through a couple of reappraisals, and then things changed. At that time, we were paid as listers, and I'm not running for that position again. I beg to differ with Mr. Flanders. The CLA today, you should have all received a copy from the state, is not 90. It's 84.39, I believe. That puts us in jeopardy to have the state demand that we do a townwide reappraisal, whether we like it or not. Number two, the town already has a qualified and long-standing assessor who assesses towns. He has several towns under his belt. Let me give you a little history. Back at the last reappraisal, which was some time ago, at the end of the reappraisal, we did fairly well. We were, I think Steve is correct, about 99. And then it slowly dropped, and the select board thought that it would be best to have an assessor, and that they could do the day-to-day work and create a new grand list over 3 years. The first year came and went, and the assessor, who was the ones who did the previous grand list, and left us with a very complicated assessment program, software called Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. You don't need to spend much time with that. He was supposed to do a third of the town a year. In the first year, he didn't do a third of the town. In the second year, he barely touched it. And that's when he was forced out. It also came to light that the town manager, according to statute, was not to manage the town assessor, the contract assessor. That was a job of the listers. That contract assessor worked for the listers, and his or her budget would be in the lister's budget. And so we have a town assessor who is not willing to do a townwide reappraisal. He and I have discussed a townwide reappraisal, and I think he would have done it if he had had the manpower that the listers could have provided, but they don't get paid. They don't get paid any more than you guys do. And they spend a great deal of time in the office at this point, basically just reviewing what he did the week before. His name is Spencer Potter. He's worked out very well, but I know you want me to stop. I will shortly. But it isn't the lister's fault. We need a townwide reappraisal. Why has the CLA gone down so much? I told you before, and you heard it again. It was these people who, if you've watched the sales in this town as the listers have, the sales have doubled. If we're at 84.39 now, I suspect by next year will be probably 8 or 9% lower than that. So we've got to get moving here and get somebody to do a townwide reappraisal. A proper RFP would merely ask for a proposal of how they were going to do the reappraisal to meet state statutes.
Thank you, Dennis. I see a hand by Doug Wilberdine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doug Wilberdine, 1329 Turnpike Road. I was a lister. Actually, my father was a lister too. I just stepped down for family reasons this year. I kind of take umbrage, really a lot of umbrage with Mr. Flanders and Ms. Blum. It's a little tragic and sad that you haven't attended any lister meetings or been active, and you just kind of pop up like a groundhog with this plan. And candidly, this will be, you'll see a lot of public opposition to your plan. You did issue a memo, I think 4 years ago, with the same idea. I'd like to say that Cheryl and Pam and Spencer work extremely, extremely hard. And, you know, as it relates to the bid, nobody had an issue with one bid on the geothermal plan. Everybody on the committee, on the select board, were wholeheartedly in support of one bid, a single bid from EEI for a $3 million geothermal project. But nobody had an issue with that. But now all of a sudden, people have an issue with a single bid. And the issue is all the appraisal firms are booked for years and years and years to come. So you guys are just not being logical about this. You really are not. You're not taking a clear view at the staff and how hard they work. And I echo what Dennis said. Spencer Potter has done a great job. Cheryl and Pam have done a great job. There's a lot of hard work being done. There's a lot of planning. There's been opposition by the select board for budgeting for the appraisal, for the reappraisal. There's been a huge effort to get this done. And for Stephen and Liz Blum to do this, it's really incredibly insulting. If you push this, it will be highlighted to the town. It is very, very insulting what you're trying to do. That's all I have to say.
Thanks. That sounded like vaguely threatening language, but I assume it was.
Oh, please, Roger, come on.
Thank you for your public comment.
You're welcome.
Linda Cook, you have your hand up.
I also was a lister in the town. I did that before I went on to the select board. And it is a job that can be learned because the state does put together nice programs teaching you, A, how to use the programs, B, to use the Marshall Swift assessing process. And in talking with Spencer, that's what he uses. And Spencer was there when I was a lister, but we were engaging Tom Vickery at the time. And it's good to have an outside person that works around the state that sees more sales than we were seeing in our town to give you a better idea where you should be buying. And the reappraisals can be a full-scale reappraisal, or during my time, there was a partial reappraisal for just land or buildings because that's the only part that was off scale. And it brought back in line. So there's a number of ways of doing this, whether you do it every 3 years or you look at your sales and you monitor it and change it to keep your CLA up. But I think having the assessor's assistance there is good. But the one problem I'm having with all this is if this reappraisal is being pushed off, you have a company willing to do it. And as you can tell, more towns, cities, or what are going to be doing this. And you have it now, as opposed to waiting 3 years and hope you can get another one, that you can move forward. But the biggest problem is if I was to buy a house today for $1 million, but it's only assessed for $500,000, I'm only going to pay taxes on that 500,000. How is that equitable to other people in our community? And that's what a reappraisal is going to do, is keep everything in line. So I'm hoping the select board and encouraging them to move forward now so that we can bring it back in line and not wait years, 3-4 years before you do this, because you are putting a burden on the residents here.
Okay. The reappraisal agenda item will come later. But thank you for your
sorry about that.
Thank you for your public comment, Linda.
Okay.
Go ahead, Cheryl Lindbergh.
Hi, Cheryl Lindbergh, 59 Koch Road. And I would just like for the chair to say to Roger that I think it's important to correct incorrect information stated. I would say that the one response received is from an approved firm by the state of Vermont, and that had that not, we only sent the RFP out to those firms that were approved by the state of Vermont. So to publicly say tonight by somebody that they're an unqualified organization is really incorrect. And individuals working for that organization, a reappraisal firm, have actually done work in Vermont in prior capacities. So I would just like to correct the record about that comment.
Do you have no public comment about the agenda item? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Go ahead, Claudette.
Just bringing us back to the agenda item, I would say that the majority, what I heard was that the board does not support this article.
Yep. Yeah. We can, it sounds like we can move on. As I said, it sounds like there's, again, none of this has been certified by Bonnie, and I haven't talked to Bonnie, and she's the only one who has the authority to do that, of course. So should folks have 65 signatures, the decision is away from us, and there's a benefit of having some discussion. And obviously, if we know that folks are serious about November, we may or may not have a duty to do more public work to help inform voters. So that's all I'll say. And let's wrap up. Go ahead, Marcia. Do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, just a quick question for Dennis. He talked about a statute which prohibits the town manager being the manager for the contract assessor. Can he send us that site?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but if there is a board of listers, then the listers are in charge and hire the assessor. If there's no board of listers, then that would go to the select board through the town manager. The reason the legislature came up with the idea of a board of listers and a separate board of select people was that the select board would be members of the Board of Civil Authority and therefore be able to review the work of the listers through the appeal process. You should know that generally with a yearly appraisal or a townwide reappraisal, 10% of the properties whose values have changed grieve to the Board of Listers. And of that 10%, another 10% will appeal to the Board of Civil Authority. And maybe one or two will go beyond that. But they're small numbers and they haven't changed in decades.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I would say too that contracts are executed with the town of Norwich, right? And I think defining what the town of Norwich may or may not mean is off scope for certainly this evening, right? But I think it's a red herring, and we could discuss at another time. All right. Let's move on from those two items of this agenda. Thank you for our petitioners, and I think it's a to be continued. Let's discuss the draft warrant otherwise. So any feedback of what has been drafted to date by board members? Go ahead, Marcia.
Of the warrant?
Yes. So the draft warrant that so for example, like we discussed, we discussed the undesignated, the artist formerly known as the undesignated fund, right? There's language there. Let's talk about that language, all that. Go ahead.
I got several things.
Sure.
So for Article 4, I'm wondering if the amount of money is actually different. When I looked at the one of the budgets, it looked like that amount should be $4,780,866. So I just pointed that out for people to look at. I'm confused about where the Article 5 and 6 come from. Why are we asking to eliminate the offices of grand juror and town agent? Under Article 8, I was going to suggest that instead of, whenever we refer to the undesignated fund, I'm suggesting that instead of calling it just that or the current, we call it the retiring undesignated fund, so that we're underscoring that we're going to get rid of it. Number 9, I think for the definition of the Operational Performance and Development Fund, the purpose statement might be clearer if it says just add 5 words to the end and voted by the select board, because I think there can be questions about what's going to happen with that money. So just, it's evident to us, but it might not be evident to other people. Then under, whenever we're talking about the ash borer, I looked up remediation, and it really means remedying or reversing or stopping environmental damage. And my understanding is that there's nothing we can do to stop this green little ash borer. So I think the word might better be response instead of remediation anytime we refer to that. Then I'm just thinking that after Article 13, I'm looking now because I made notes on the first version and then I got a second version. After Article 13, there's a separate paragraph, which looks like it should be another article.
Right.
Right? So shouldn't that be Article 14?
Yeah, I think that Rod's nodding. Yeah.
Which makes everything else get renumbered. And hold on just a sec. I think that might be, is Article 37 still in there? Because that looked like a dangling participle. Article 37. The one in the original is gone, so that's fine. And then you've got the wrong list of select board members at the end, and I think you should change that and maybe also look to see that you've got the right list of school board members.
Yeah, that needs to be fixed, all of that. Okay, Claudette, go ahead.
So I agree with what Marcia said, except for under Article 4, what we voted on last week for the budget was $4,958,865. So that the number that's listed in that article is correct. Article 5 and 6, I'm sure, is coming from Bonnie because we have never been able to fill those positions.
And the legislature has authorized us to take this action.
Correct. And then I think those were my responses or comments.
Good, Marcia.
So I'm just wondering, the other number that I saw on a budget, that I'm just not understanding why they're different.
Because probably one was one version of the budget, and that was not the one that we voted on last week, where we voted to approve the $4,958,865 with all of the changes that we've asked Roger and Fielding to make in various designated fund allocations and et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So does that give us a surplus of 200,000?
No.
I think you just wrote down the wrong number, Marcia, on your notes, if I may.
We don't have a surplus in a budget that has not yet been passed and approved.
So we voted that we were going to approve a budget for this amount, and the budget that I was looking at that said for 23, but 23 is now. No.
We voted to send this amount to the voters for approval for FY23.
Yep, I got that.
Okay.
So I don't know where you're coming up with this 4,700,000, unless that was FY22's budget.
I think it was 23, but let me just find the document and you guys can talk.
Yes, let's do that.
Well, one thing I did notice is that in the addendum to the material that we received today, that I think there was a title in Fielding's financial reports, because something said FY23 revenues or expenditures. And I think you really meant FY22 year-to-date expenditures.
That's probably it.
So I think Marcia was looking at FY22's total budget and Fielding's report on expenditures to date versus because it was mistitled.
That's exactly it.
Okay. Cool.
Do you get where I'm coming from?
I do.
I know Marcia's nodding yes, but I don't know if Roger and the rest of the board.
I don't share Marcia. I know the number we voted on, and I'm glad that Marcia now understands.
Yeah. It's page 21 of the second iteration.
Okay. So if there's no other comments, I just want to return to your edits to the undesignated fund 1. Can you repeat what you wanted to see edited, Marcia? Because I feel like we talked about why we weren't going to do that last time. So I want to.
Well, and just instead of saying current, I mean, aren't we retiring it really?
Uh-huh.
And so that's all I said. Change current to retiring.
Well, it will be retired after they take action. So Rod, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm more than happy to hear Fielding on this question, but I understand Marcia's idea. I think it's a good one, except I feel like on a certain level it introduces another kind of confusion over what it actually is right now. And I think that the importance of Marcia's question actually goes to how we present the warning to the voters in the informational meeting. I think that the word retiring is a great word to use in the explanation of the budget, but I'm not sure I want to drop that word in there in the article for fear that it will be confusing in some other way. Right now, we call it actually we don't, I think that what we need to do is call it exactly how it appears in our chart of accounts, which is why I'm going to call on Fielding in a moment. And so that if anyone, I'm imagining a situation 10 years or even 20 years from now when somebody goes to look and investigate what this is, where would they go? To what reference would they go to find out what we called things in 2020 versus 2023? And the place you'd probably go is the chart of accounts. So whatever we're really calling it is what we should call it here. And that's what I'm going to rely on Fielding for. I'm not concerned even about the short-term decision-making process of this annual town meeting. I'm contemplating confusion with two town managers down the road who are like, what are they talking about? I can't figure any of this stuff out. I've got no idea what they're talking about. So Fielding can help me out about what we really call it right now.
Go ahead. Can you just answer that narrow question, Fielding? Because Marcia was nodding, which is good.
So this is in reference to this $860,000 balance that we have.
What is it called?
On the chart of accounts, that is called the unrestricted fund.
Right. Okay. Let's use that. How's that?
Okay.
Does that work? Does that work for you, Marcia?
Yes. And I do think we should make a point of, in the explanation in the meeting, explaining what's happening.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. Any edits, any further discussion on agenda item 5? Okay. I feel good. This will come back to us in obviously a far more polished form, and we'll be making more technical changes, and we'll be seeing another article drafted in the spirit of what we talked about in terms of the sidewalk stuff too. Marcia, go ahead.
Sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I already did that. Article 37 went away, didn't it? That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Go ahead, Claudette. Yes, go ahead.
One other question. Under Article, you're saying Article 37 is going away?
Oh, there was a bogus Article 37 in the first draft.
Oh, I'm talking in this most recent draft, but it gets to the payment of taxes. And this is a question for Fielding, actually.
Yeah. Yes.
We had changed this at the last town meeting to the 6 p.m. deadline versus the 4:30 p.m. deadline, which is when Fielding, I think, officially leaves. And I personally, I think we should just flip it back to the 4:30, unless Fielding really wants to hang out in the office until 6 p.m. on the date, on the final date of tax collection.
Good point.
But remember, it was difficult because we voted and then we didn't follow what we voted on. That was the problem. But what the spirit of what happened is, if we stay open to 6, it gives working folks a chance to pay their taxes in non-working hours. But the issue was that decision was made by the former town manager, even though we didn't vote to do so. So I'm in favor of 6 for these equitable reasons, but we just need to do whatever the voters approve.
And I would say just bring it back to 4:30.
Fielding, what do you
because
want?
I don't want Fielding to have to stick around until 6 o'clock, and he can actually walk across the street and deposit the bank accounts deposit the checks instead of having them sitting in the vault for the weekend.
Okay, so Rob has his hand up, and then Fielding will choose his allegiance. Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to point out that personally, I appreciate sleeping late and coming in a little late. So it may affect family, and we should give some consideration to that. But we don't have to make them work more than 8 hours at a stretch.
Fielding, what would you? Oh no, Marcia, go ahead.
Sorry. I want to go back to 38. Carry on, Fielding.
Okay, so Fielding, do you have an opinion on this issue?
I am happy to go either way. As a working parent myself, I can appreciate the willingness to accommodate other working folks who have jobs they have to do as well. And so the 6 o'clock time frame, I'm happy to do it. I'm not going to draw a line in the sand on this one.
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Cheryl. Would you go ahead? I'm sorry. Go ahead. We'll do whatever the voters say, Cheryl. This time, did you have your hand up?
Muted.
Go ahead, you're on mute.
No, I thought Marcia was going to speak. So
Yes, go ahead. Your hand
Thank
was
you.
up.
I was just going to say, if August 12th and February 10th were the only days that one could pay their taxes, I would agree with 6 o'clock, but they're not. So I don't find it as compelling.
I have no idea why this continues to be one of the most contentious topics to come before this board. It seems I don't, do you want to call the question? Can someone please make a motion on this?
Can I just
go ahead? This is like deja vu, if I may. Go ahead, Cheryl.
So it was this way all along because Tracy Hall officially closes at 4:30. And as Marcia just said, which I would have said if she hadn't, this isn't the only day you can pay taxes. And there were 3 people that arrived last year between 4:30 and 6 o'clock. I mean, it isn't that people can't come before the end of the day or come, put it in the box the day before. So 4:30 is the official time of Tracy Hall hours every day of the week.
Thank you, Cheryl. Go ahead, Claudette.
Sorry, I raised the issue.
I know.
I would defer to our finance director.
Yes.
If the finance director is willing to stay until 6, then leave it as it's written.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, I didn't mean it. Thank you. We're good. Are we done?
I'm sorry I brought it up, but I don't need a motion.
It was my fault, not yours.
You do not need a motion for this.
Yes, word. Okay. So we're good?
We're good. Let's move on.
But go ahead, Marcia. Do you have anything further on agenda item 5 for the local?
No, but Article 38, I knew it was bothering me. It says to transact any other business that may legally come before the annual Norwich town meeting. Do we have to vote that? Do people have to vote that?
It's always in there.
It always is?
It's always in there, but nothing else can come before the voters.
And Miranda's
because
not.
we do Australian ballot.
It's sort of just formality, I guess.
It's Vermont tradition.
If it were like number 1, I'd sort of think that it had some basis, but it's 38. It seems so weird.
It totally struck me as weird, and I don't know the origin, but apparently it's like, this is one of those ones that's chiseled in granite, Marcia. It makes no sense to me at all. Particularly the bottom versus the top. Yeah, it's just nuts. I don't get it.
All right, it's an enigma. Let's leave it alone.
Don't poke the enigma. Okay, so we're good on article or agenda 5?
Whoa.
Yeah? Woo. For now, right? It'll be to be continued. So the next item on the agenda is the final version of FY23. So we've just had more article. We have more finality, more sense of things because some articles, social service articles have come in, right? So I think that's part of the reason why this is back. Fielding, walk us through what is different from last time, or what is more final about this. And is it final? Do we have to talk about this again? Go ahead.
Nothing has, in terms of the operating budget, has changed since you voted on this last week. This has all the changes we've been working towards, whether that be the inclusion we bumped up the designated reserve fund allocation for the town reappraisal from 25 to 50,000. We decided upon the more conservative, and which in reality means higher designated fund allocations to the paving and bridge reserve funds as well. Those were the big changes or the big decisions that we made last week. In terms, that would mean, and the only thing that's really still in flux are the other monetary articles. The only change I am super aware of that is actually reflected here would be the public library has increased their request from $288,660 to $300,000. I don't believe there have been any other changes, or at least I have not been aware of any further changes to recurring monetary article requests.
Okay, that's great. So next week we'll have everything finalized and can have maybe a more official motion. Okay, so the library has a 4% increase. Not that I would know anything about that. Claudette, go ahead.
I hate to bring it up, but we did have a discussion a few months ago that if there's any increase in the appropriation request, that the petitioner would come before the select board and explain that request. And that was in the policy or the revision that we approved.
Right.
My understanding was that it would be a petition, that they would have to petition, which has been done. So it's been petitioned and submitted to Bonnie.
Yeah.
The option, it was may come before the board. It was always sort of discretionary. The requirement was a petition instead of the form, if it was an increase.
I would have to go back to what we approved. I thought it was I didn't think it was a may. I thought it was more will.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I would have to go back and look.
I remember
it was the increase in funding or a new petitioner.
My understanding of the process, and I think also the town manager's office, my understanding of the process was that if it was an increase, it would be petitioned, the petition would be submitted, and there would be the possibility that a request would be made to appear. So this was any increases by any agency took a petition.
Anyway, we go through this every year and we keep messing it up somehow. So, and we keep saying we need to clean it up. And I thought we had really attempted to this year, and clearly we didn't. But
yes.
It's too late now. If it's a petitioned article, it goes on the ballot. Unless we say it shouldn't, and I'm not going to say that.
Okay. Go ahead, Marcia.
But I do think we should look back and make sure what we did, because I have this very same recollection as Claudette.
Okay. So I just want to be clear, you're going back to correct the record and to fix future practices, or are you going back to look to make request appearance of folks who to do the process differently? I really need clarity on that. Claudette? And then I need a motion, actually, I would say.
I'm going to go back to look for clarity. I am not willing at this stage in the game to say to not allow the library's petition to go on the ballot. But we must fix this and be clear with the board and the town manager's office, the process that needs to be put in place for petitioned articles. And we need to adhere to that process. But it's too late now. I'm in full support of the petition by the library to get on to the warning.
Okay, so let's move on from this agenda item with all that said. How's that? The next item, and so it's 9:44, right? I don't want to go past 10 personally. So do we have any suggestions? I think we might need to, we wanted to look at the documents for the capital improvement plan and move towards an adoption. And we wanted to discuss the ARPA eligible projects in order to gain clarity if like Tracy Hall and generators were eligible. So that way we didn't have to factor them into a capital plan. That is my understanding of where we left that off. I don't know if at 9:45 we should have that conversation. So I want to see what y'all think. Go ahead, Claudette.
I would recommend that we defer all other discussion for tonight and have a meeting next week, or put some of this on Friday's agenda. I think we should look at the money that we're possibly setting aside for pedestrian trails, sidewalk stuff in the capital plan. Put a line item there for the broad category.
Okay, so we need to finalize and approve the warrant, right? So, and of which what you just mentioned, Claudette, had a part, was up until this meeting had us making an article for that. So we'll look at the warrant and we'll discuss the CIP and we'll discuss the ARPA money in the particular context of generators and Tracy Hall next week. Is that okay? I mean, we're meeting a lot, people.
Mm-hmm. We are. We've been meeting a lot for the last 2 years. We've been meeting ridiculously a lot for the last 2 years. But I also, can I just ask for clarification on when the
warrant?
The RFP, I know when the warrant needs to be done, but the RFP, what was the final date for that firm's proposal? Was it January 24th?
It's January 29th.
January 29th. So, I mean, I think we can wrap a lot of this up. The budget, in my opinion, the budget's done. The operational budget's done. That's been approved. We just need to clean up the warning language for town meeting and do the final iteration for the capital improvement plan. That is my opinion, what we need to wrap up for fiscal year 23.
Okay. That's good.
And really start looking at ARPA.
Okay, so go ahead, Marcia.
So do you think we should do something about this reappraisal RFP? Is that something that we can do on Friday, or is that going to be lumped later?
I think we can do the 3 agenda items next week, but we have to be committed to 2 hours. I honestly, I know we're all juggling a lot of personal obligations. I can't really do more than 2 hours. So if we can be committed to these 3 agenda items for 2 hours, then I'm fine with it. So how do folks feel?
I like the credit plan. Good.
Fine.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Just if anything else is to be considered, we can have it in advance so that we're like ready to go.
Yeah. In terms of the articles.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and these 3 things that we're going to look at.
Yeah.
When we get to that.
Okay. Go ahead. Yep. Claudette.
Well, I'm just wondering, can we do we think it's possible to get the warning finalized by Friday? Or do we need?
I'm in favor of keeping that conversation. So Friday we have just so folks know, Friday is a special meeting to hear the results of the background search from our consultant for the next town manager. I would like to only discuss the agenda item.
That's fine with me. Okay. And I agree, 2 hours max, and we've got to really just like hold ourselves to that meeting time.
All right. Fielding, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a request of the board, and if we are going, now that we have this extra week to kind of mull on this CIP. If there are projects, because there are projects listed on this that are from predecessors in DPW and such, for just an example. But if there are projects that you would like to see, to let us know, and we can kind of, if there's any changes in that sense, or if there are, I know we have taken away like a side-by-side and stuff like that, but now would be the time to let Rod and myself know that if there are any changes you would like to see, and then we can make those adjustments in preparation for next week.
Yeah, I think the sooner people are able to do the work that they do, prepare for a meeting and send on their concerns in advance, the more nimble we will be able to be in the meeting. So send email staff, email Rod. The poor soul will meet with us next week.
So when we say next week, we mean next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. maybe?
I do 5:30 because for special meetings, because I know that y'all are here already. Is that okay?
It helps a lot. Helps the chickens. It's all good.
Chickens.
Okay. Good.
5:30 works for me.
Okay.
That's fine.
Go ahead, Marcia. Go ahead.
So it's 5:30 Friday and 5:30 next Wednesday.
Yeah. And I'll warn that. I'll send that to Miranda to warn. Okay. So we can probably do a motion to adjourn. Is that it, Claudette? Go ahead.
That was it. I move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Okay, seconded by Mary. Any discussion?
And thank everybody for participating in tonight's meeting.
Thank you so much.
Yes, that's true.
All right. All in favor? Okay. Good night. Thank you.
Night.
Recording